Hi there, my YouTube family, and to all the night owls and true crime lovers, welcome back to Crime Whisper. I know a lot of you are tuning in to relax, maybe even to fall asleep to the sound of a story. So before we begin, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are. Alright, get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's begin. Case 1. Every town has a dark side. Tonight, we head to a quiet community, just southwest of Dallas, Midlothian, Texas. A place where, 8 years ago, tragedy struck inside the walls of a church. A community continues to gather each April to remember a woman taken far too soon. A mother, a wife, and a beloved fitness instructor, Missy Bevers. It was early morning, April 18th, 2016. When someone dressed in tactical gear that looked eerily like a SWAT uniform entered Creekside Church of Christ and murdered Missy Bevers. She had been there preparing for a 5 a.m. fitness class, just like she always did. But that day, someone was waiting. Despite security footage, potential sightings of a vehicle nearby, and even the murder weapon being left at the scene, no one has ever been arrested. Nearly 9 years later, her killer still walks free. So tonight, we're traveling back to that rainy morning in Midlothian to explore the unsolved murder of Terry Missy Bevers. Missy was well known in her community for her kind heart and upbeat personality. Born and raised in Texas, she was the kind of woman who brought energy into every room she entered. She wasn't the type to sit behind a desk. Missy was active, adventurous, and passionate about health and fitness. She eventually married Brandon Bevers, and together they raised 3 daughters. Between motherhood and managing family life, Missy poured her soul into her work as a Camp Gladiator instructor, a popular outdoor fitness program in Texas. Her students didn't just come for a workout. They came for the motivation, the support, and the positivity that Missy radiated. One student recalled, "Missy lived her purpose. She encouraged us spiritually, mentally, and physically. Her energy was unmatched, but her story would be cut short in the most devastating way." On the morning of her murder, Missy had planned to lead an outdoor class, but heavy rain forced her to move it indoors, something that wasn't out of the ordinary. She arrived at Creekside Church around 4 a.m., just over an hour before class was scheduled to begin. Surveillance footage captured her bringing in equipment and preparing the space. But when her students arrived, just before 5 a.m., they didn't find Missy leading the warm-up. Instead, they discovered her body brutally attacked and lying in a pool of blood. She had suffered multiple puncture wounds, and a hammer, believed to be the murder weapon, was found nearby. When investigators arrived, it was clear they were dealing with a homicide. But was it random, or had Missy been targeted? At first, detectives considered the possibility of a botched robbery. Maybe someone had broken into the church, assuming it would be empty, and panicked when Missy showed up. But that theory quickly fell apart. Missy's personal belongings, her phone, wallet, and iPad, were all left untouched. Nothing of value was stolen. This wasn't a robbery. This was a planned attack. Fortunately, the church had security cameras, although the outdoor ones weren't working. The interior cameras captured something chilling at approximately 4:15 a.m., just minutes before Missy was last seen on camera. A figure in full tactical gear was seen walking slowly through the church hallways, dressed in a helmet, gloves, and a vest labeled police. This individual methodically opened doors, smashed windows, and appeared to be searching for something or someone. They moved with eerie calmness, not rushing, not hesitating. In fact, their behavior didn't match that of a startled intruder. This person came prepared. They brought tools. They wore heavy gear, and they stayed long enough to explore multiple parts of the church. By 4:18 a.m., Missy re-entered the building with her equipment. That's the last time she was ever seen alive. Forensic experts examined the footage closely. One unusual detail stood out: the suspect's gait. Their walk was strange, almost like a limp or a shuffle. Some experts believed it indicated a physical impairment. Others, like forensic podiatrist Dr. Michael Nirenberg, suggested the awkward movement was caused by the unfamiliar tactical gear weighing them down. Regardless, the gear wasn't worn. Casually, it was intentional. It gave the killer a specific look, perhaps to disguise themselves or mislead investigators. And while the footage gave plenty of visual clues, it didn't offer a clear look at the suspect's face. In fact, authorities still don't know for certain whether the person in the video is male or female. And still, one haunting truth remained: nothing was stolen. The only motive appeared to be murder. Investigators now believe the and door bashing were staged to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. But it wasn't. This was calculated. The killer knew Missy would be alone. They knew the layout of the building, and they came equipped to kill. The question is, why? Who wanted Missy Bevers dead? Despite fingerprints, DNA testing, and countless hours of reviewing footage and leads, her case remains unsolved. Her family, her children, her students, still waiting for justice. And as we close our eyes tonight, remember, evil sometimes hides in plain sight. Missy's story reminds us how quickly life can change, and how deeply we need answers for peace to return. Stay safe, stay curious, and always whisper for the truth. Continuing Case 1, the murder of Missy Bevers. Despite early efforts, investigators struggled to piece together a clear picture of what happened. They even attempted to map out the killer's escape route using the limited surveillance footage and crime scene evidence, but nothing conclusive emerged, so they shifted focus, turning to the people who knew Missy best, hoping someone might shine light on who could have had a reason to harm her. Family and friends painted a consistent picture. Missy had no known enemies. She was well liked, deeply loved by her students, and admired for her energy and kindness. But in any murder investigation, police have to look closely at the victim's inner circle. That meant scrutinizing her husband, Brandon Bevers. As it turned out, Brandon had an airtight alibi. He was hundreds of miles away in Mississippi on a fishing trip at the time of the murder. But a strange incident involving his father, Randy Bevers, briefly raised eyebrows. Just days after Missy's murder, Randy brought a blood-stained shirt to the dry cleaners. Naturally, this raised suspicions, but the case unraveled quickly. Randy had been in California when Missy was killed, and the blood on the shirt. It was from a dogfight he'd broken up between two pets. DNA tests confirmed the stain came from an animal, not a person. Still, the Midlothian community wasn't sitting idly by. There was a killer out there, and residents were desperate for answers. The town rallied around Missy's family, organizing vigils, creating tributes, and supporting her 3 daughters in any way they could. Social media became a powerful tool. People shared Missy's story across platforms, hoping to spark a lead or a confession. And as investigators combed through Missy's online presence, something strange emerged: a string of unsettling messages from an unknown man on LinkedIn. In the months before her death, the contents of those messages have never been released to the public, but authorities described them as creepy and unusual. While police eventually ruled out the sender as the killer, they did believe the messages hinted at a deeper, disturbing truth. Missy may have unknowingly interacted with her killer before her death. Whether it was someone she barely knew, or someone quietly obsessed with her, detectives remained convinced the killer was not a complete stranger. Possibly someone harboring an unhealthy fixation, who snapped when they realized they couldn't be part of her life. Then came another clue. Police released footage of a car scene just before dawn on the morning of Missy's murder. It was a silver or light-colored 2010 to 2012 Nissan Altima, caught on camera outside a nearby Outdoors store at around 2 a.m. The vehicle behaved strangely, circling the parking lot, flashing its headlights, and briefly parking in a secluded area before driving away. Under normal circumstances, this wouldn't mean much. But considering what happened hours later at the church just down the road, The timing and behavior were too odd to ignore. And yet, another dead end. Despite public appeals, the driver never came forward. Whether they had anything to do with the case, or were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, remains unknown. Now, nearly 9 years later, the murder of Missy Bevers is still unsolved. It's hard to imagine, given the mountain of video footage and clues, yet no suspect has ever been named. Multiple agencies, including the FBI, have joined the investigation. Still, the lack of solid forensic evidence, no usable fingerprints, no confirmed DNA, has proven to be the investigation's greatest obstacle. Authorities continue to ask the public for help. A $150,000 reward remains in place for any information that could identify the killer and finally bring justice to Missy's family. What's most haunting is this: it's still possible that Missy's killer had no meaningful connection to her at all. Maybe it truly was random. Maybe this person entered the church planning to rob it, vandalize it, or simply romance when Missy walked in. The fatal confrontation happened, but police aren't convinced. They believe it was premeditated, that someone carefully planned what they were going to wear, what they were going to bring, and when they were going to strike. The tactical gear, the hammer, the calm, methodical behavior. To investigate every possibility, police went through Missy's phones, emails, social accounts, and every person in her social circle. But time and again, they hit walls. No suspects, no motive, no closure. Brandon Bevers, Missy's husband, has occasionally spoken out. He's described the devastation of learning about her death while away on a fishing trip, and the added pain of being treated as a suspect early in the case. Media scrutiny was relentless. Rumors flew. But despite everything, Brandon remained cooperative, willing to help the investigation however he could. He shared how their family has endured heartbreak, judgment, and the overwhelming challenge of raising 3 girls in the shadow of tragedy. Through it all, Brandon leaned on faith, his belief in a higher power, in divine justice, and in hope. But even now, Brandon believes Missy's murder was random, a theory that contrasts sharply with what law enforcement continues to suggest, that this was a targeted, calculated killing, no matter which version is true. One fact remains clear: someone walked into a church on a rainy Texas morning and murdered an innocent woman in cold blood. And that person is still out there. Case 2. Spirited Away. The disappearance of Rico. Our next story takes us to Tokyo, Japan. A quiet Friday evening on April 18th, 2008. Most people were finishing up their work week, including Rika, a young woman living in a recently built apartment complex in KT Ward. The building itself was considered quite secure even by Japan's standards. It had surveillance cameras at every elevator on each floor, and it was just a 10-minute walk from Shomei Station on the Junior K line, a safe and convenient place to live. That night, Rika returned home, just like she always did, alone. She was seen on security footage entering the building and taking the elevator up to the 9th floor, where she shared a small studio apartment unit 916 with her older sister, Ra. That was the last confirmed sighting of her. At 8:43 p.m., R.A. also returned home. She expected to find her sister there already, especially since she'd received a message from Rika at exactly 7:21 p.m. saying she had finished work and was heading home. But when R.A. opened the door to their apartment, something felt off. The front door was unlocked, which was odd. The lights were off, and the space was completely dark. Only faint illumination came from the city lights outside, but just inside the doorway were Rika's shoes, suggesting she had made it home. Ra assumed her sister had just stepped into the bathroom quickly, maybe in a rush, and forgot to turn on the lights. That seemed logically at first. She changed into her pajamas, grabbed a yogurt, and sat down to unwind. But as time passed, the silence inside the apartment became unnerving. Eventually, she walked up to the bathroom door and gently knocked. The door creaked open. It was empty. Still, she didn't panic. Rika often stepped outside to take phone calls so she wouldn't disturb her sister. Ra grabbed her coat and went out to search, checking the lobby, walking outside, looking up and down the street. But Rika was nowhere. She returned to the 9th floor, hoping maybe Rika had come back while she was out. But that's when Ra noticed something terrifying: small bloodstains near the entrance wall. Stains she hadn't seen earlier. Now, she was frightened. At 9:16 p.m., R.A. called the police and told them her sister's purse and phone were missing. The operator calmly instructed her to stay inside and lock the door. Officers were on their way. Minutes later, Ra called her father. By now, the fear was sinking in. While waiting for the police to arrive, Ra began checking the apartment more thoroughly. That's when she noticed that a kitchen knife was missing, along with a pink jersey that Rika often wore. Then she saw her sister's earrings scattered on the floor near the entrance. And near the hallway tiles, more blood, this time smeared, as if someone had tried to clean it up but hadn't done a very good job. When police arrived, they immediately began questioning Ra, and soon after, her parents, who had come to the scene. The signs of a struggle were confined to the apartment itself, but building surveillance only raised more questions than answers. Ra was seen entering the building, alone at 8:43 p.m., nothing unusual. No one was seen following her. At 7:31 p.m., Rika had exited the 9th floor elevator. That was the last time cameras captured her. Authorities sealed the entire building and began going unit by unit. This was a new apartment complex opened just 4 months earlier in December. Most of the units were still unoccupied. On the 9th floor, only one other apartment besides Ra and Rika's was occupied: Unit 9 Ratas. 18, 2 doors down. At around 10:20 p.m., officers knocked on that door. No answer. They waited a bit, then moved on. But 20 minutes later, a man walked out. He was the resident of Pak, dear-old Takanori Hashima. The police asked if he'd heard or seen anything unusual. Hashima said no. He explained that he had only moved in a month ago and didn't know his neighbors personally. When they explained what had happened, he expressed shock and fear, saying, "That's terrifying, I'm scared." The next day, investigators continued their search. After sweeping through all the vacant units with no results, they returned to speak with Hashima again. This time, they asked to search his apartment. Hashima didn't hesitate. He invited them. Inside, the apartment was cluttered, filled with stacks of cardboard boxes. When officers asked what was inside, Hashima cooperated, opening several boxes. They were filled with anime DVDs, video games, and various collectibles. He even opened more boxes voluntarily, trying to be helpful. After about 20 minutes of searching and finding nothing suspicious, the officers thanked him and left. Meanwhile, forensic testing confirmed the blood found in apartment 916 belonged to Rika. But even more troubling, they found a partial fingerprint on the smudged stains near the hallway. The print didn't match Rika. It didn't match R.A. It didn't match any family members or anyone with authorized access to the apartment. So, police made a decision. They fingerprinted every single resident in the building. Still no matches. As news of the case spread, it captured national attention. Media crews set up outside the building, cameras trained on the 9th floor. Reporters tried to speak with anyone coming in or out of the complex. One of the few residents who agreed to speak publicly, Takanori Hashima. He gave interviews to reporters, saying he was horrified by what had happened, but there was something deeply unsettling about how he spoke, while his words were serious. His body language told a different story. He laughed often, and at completely inappropriate moments. When asked about R.A., he laughed. When questioned about the missing girl, he laughed. When asked if he had heard screams or strange noises, he chuckled. In one brief interview, Hashim laughed 16 times even. while describing how terrified he felt. It was as if he was enjoying the attention, and the police. They started watching him a little more closely. When asked if he thought he was under suspicion, Hashima laughed and said, "Well, yeah, I guess I am suspicious," before laughing again. Something about him just didn't sit right with investigators, so they decided to take a closer look, beginning with the fingerprints he had previously submitted. To their surprise, the grooves and ridges on his fingertips were barely visible, as if they had been deliberately tampered with to render them unreadable. This raised significant red flags. However, it still wasn't enough to arrest him. That changed a month later, when police surprised him with another demand for his fingerprints. This time, although he agreed reluctantly, the prints came back as a match to the partial fingerprint found in Rika's apartment. On May 25th, Hashima was arrested, but initially only for breaking and entering. That charge alone, however, granted authorities the legal grounds to conduct a full forensic search of his apartment using luminol. Investigators detected extensive traces of blood. Lab results confirmed that the blood matched Rika's DNA. Her genetic material was found throughout Hashima's apartment, in the hallway, the bathroom, on a t-shirt, and disturbingly, on a cutting board, a set of kitchen knives, and a knife sharpener. Even the refrigerator contained brownish substances, believed to be blood and bodily fluids, again a match to Rika DNA. Then, on May 26th, just one day after his arrest, Rika's cell phone was discovered hidden behind a toilet at Hashima's workplace. His fingerprints were found on the device, which also contained a small photograph of Rika and a piece of paper with her name on it. Confronted with the mounting evidence, Hashima confessed, and, when he did, he showed no shame. Instead, he seemed to relive the events with chilling satisfaction, offering a disturbing and detailed account of what he had done. He admitted to becoming infatuated with a young office lady who lived in room 916, right next door to him. He had been following her for nearly a month, but strangely, he claimed to be unaware that she lived with her older sister, Rika. In fact, Rika turned out to be the one he had been fixated on. Hashima confessed to harboring a dark fantasy. He wanted to create, in his own words, a slave for my selfish desires. He chose Friday, April 18th, to carry out his plan, knowing that the weekend would allow him uninterrupted time. That evening, as Rika returned home, Hashima, who had been listening closely, put on a tracksuit and walked barefoot to avoid making noise or leaving shoe prints. The moment Rika opened her door, he forced his way inside and attacked her. She screamed and fought back harder than he expected. She nearly managed to shove him out, but he slammed her head against the wall, dazing her and causing her to bleed. Her resistance weakened, and Hashima tied her hands with a towel. He then grabbed a knife from her apartment and threatened to kill her if she made a sound. Holding her at knife point, he led her into his own apartment and threw her onto a mattress. He restrained her with tape and turned off her phone. He tried to sexually assault her, but once again, Rika fought back with such ferocity that he was unable to carry out the assault. Frustrated, he instead watched pornography, so absorbed that he lost track of time until a knock on the door jolted him. It was 10:20 p.m., and 2 police officers stood outside. Panicked, he gagged Rika and taped her mouth shut. Then, he waited in silence for about 20 minutes before deciding to step outside, pretending he was heading to the convenience store to observe the officers' movements. When they stopped him for questioning, he pretended to be surprised and calm, but internally, he was terrified. That moment convinced him to abandon his original plan of keeping Rika alive as a sex slave. Instead, he began thinking about how to cover up the crime. Back in his apartment, Hashima used a stolen knife to stab Rika in the neck. He admitted to watching her slowly die, praying in his mind, "Please die soon." But it was taking too long. In desperation, he pulled the knife out, believing it would quicken her death. He continued to monitor her pulse and heartbeat until they faded. He described the sounds she made, her groans and moans as she took her final breath. This part of his confession was so graphic and disturbing that Rika's family couldn't sit through it during the trial. They wept uncontrollably. What made this even more tragic was that when officers had knocked on the door earlier, Rika had still been alive, only feet away, so close to being rescued from the horrifying fate that followed. Once she had died, Hashima untied her and dragged her body into the bathroom. He stripped her naked and began to dismember her using knives and a saw he had already prepared. He started with her head. He couldn't bear to look at her face, claiming he felt as though she was silently cursing him for what he had done. From there, he severed her limbs, skinned her arms and legs, and cut open her torso to remove her internal organs. He even described cutting off her hair, scalp, eyes, nose, ears, and lips, placing them all on the cutting board. He sawed her bones into smaller pieces and boiled parts of her body until soft, continuing to break them down over several days. His primary method of disposal was flushing pieces of her remains down the toilet. However, some bones proved too difficult, so he kept them in his refrigerator, or stuffed them into dusty old boxers beneath his bed, deep in piles he believed police wouldn't bother checking, and they didn't. He later confessed to cutting open her skull and flushing her brain matter down the toilet as well. There were even moments during this horrific process when police knocked on asking for another set of fingerprints. At that very moment, Hashima was in the middle of dismembering Rika. To avoid identification, he had used a corrosive agent to damage his own fingertips on his walks to work. He carried Rika's bones and body parts in his backpack or pockets, discarding them in sewers, dumpsters, or areas where stray dogs roamed. He kept her phone with the intent of turning it off later, to give the illusion that she was still alive. Later, police found some of Rika's belongings in Hashima's office. The rest, her clothing, wallet, and ID cards, had all been cut into tiny pieces and flushed down the toilet. Hashima admitted to disposing of the final bone fragment on May 1st. When he noticed a drop in police activity on May 8th, he discarded the remaining blood-soaked towels in public trash bins. After that, he resumed life as if nothing had happened until his arrest. Following his confession, authorities launched a massive search across sewer systems, landfills, and garbage sites throughout Kota Ward. It was an unthinkable and grueling task, sifting through human waste and filth in what could only be described as a truly horrific job. Between May 28th and June 6th, investigators recovered 49 bone fragments and 172 pieces of flesh, each cut into 5 centimeters pieces. DNA tests confirmed they all belonged to Rika. Among the remains were her driver's license, skin with a belly button piercing hole, and a finger, undeniable evidence of her fate. Hashima's murder trial began on January 13, 2009, at the Tokyo District Court. Prosecutors opened with photographs of Rika Tojo's mutilated remains, images that horrified the public and devastated her grieving family. Everyone was asking the same question: what kind of person could commit such an atrocity? Takanori Hashima was born on January 5, 1975, in Okayama Prefecture, into a well-off prominent family. He was the eldest of 4 children. His grandfather had been a politician, his father a successful tax accountant. But despite the privilege, his life was marked early on by tragedy. Just shy of his 2nd birthday, Hashima fell into a tub of boiling water while chasing a cat, suffering severe burns on both legs. He underwent multiple surgeries and skin grafts, and couldn't walk for 6 months, although he physically recovered. The emotional trauma left lasting damage. Throughout his childhood, he endured relentless bullying. Classmates mocked him, calling him burnt kid and fire dwarf. His father offered no emotional support, dismissively telling him that men don't cry about things like that. Worse still, he forced young Hashima to wear shorts to school, exposing his scars and worsening the bullying. His mother, according to Hashima, stood by and did nothing. This led to a deep sense of betrayal. He grew up feeling utterly alone and rejected, blaming his parents for everything including the accident itself. He claimed he once considered killing them but ultimately didn't go through with it. In 1993, after graduating high school, Hashima moved to Tokyo to escape his painful past. He lived alone and worked as a contract employee, earning around 500,000 yen a month. His co-workers described him as deeply insecure, arrogant toward lower-level staff, and openly hostile to anyone in a romantic relationship. He dismissed them as fools. But what shocked the courtroom the most was Hashima's confession to a disturbing fetish. He was sexually aroused by amputees. From a young age, he had fixated on graphic depictions of women with amputated limbs in non-consensual scenarios and frequently pleasured himself to this material. This disturbing detail forced many to reconsider his account of what he had done, to recant whether he had told the whole truth. Was she killed quickly and cleanly, or was her suffering far worse than he admitted? Sadly, due to the extreme dismemberment, forensic experts couldn't determine the full extent of the injuries. Out of respect for the victim, the trial focused strictly on the known facts. The prosecution sought the death penalty, and so did Hashima himself, stating, "I want to be executed and apologize in hell." The defense countered by pointing to his traumatic upbringing, mental health issues, clean criminal record, and the remorse he expressed during trial. They emphasized that he had cooperated with investigators from the start, but prosecutors challenged this narrative. They argued his supposed remorse only surfaced after his arrest, and his behavior prior, laughing during interviews, methodically disposing of her body for weeks, revealed a calculating, unrepentant mind. His actions, they claimed, proved he had committed murder and worked hard to get away with it. On February 18, 2009, Takanori Hashima was sentenced to life in prison. Presiding Judge Hideki Haiji stated the motive was a twisted desire to enslave Rika Tojo sexually. He condemned Hashima's cold-blooded murder and the way he discarded her remains as if she were garbage. In the judge's own words, this is an extremely despicable crime that tramples on the dignity of the deceased and inflicts deep emotional pain on the family. However, citing precedent from the Supreme Court, the judge did not issue the death penalty. Since there was only one victim, the court ruled the crime, though horrific, did not meet the threshold of exceptionally heinous required for capital punishment. While the attack was cold-blooded, it wasn't considered cruel or prolonged enough to justify execution. This decision left Rika's family heartbroken. Hashima himself repeated his desire to die as an apology, but the judge concluded it is more appropriate for him to spend the rest of his life praying for the victim's soul and atoning for his crimes. The prosecution appealed the ruling, and a hearing was held at the Tokyo High Court on June 11, 2009. Hashima refused to appear, stating again that he wanted to be executed. But on September 10th, the court upheld the original verdict, life imprisonment. The case was officially closed. Takanori Hashima now remains incarcerated in Chiba prison, where he will likely spend the rest of his life. June 30th, 2019. It was a warm, humid Sunday when 28-year-old Loon Hai, her husband Yun Sang-yep, and a group of their friends set off for a weekend getaway to the Gapyeong Valley in South Korea. Popular retreat known for its calm waters and scenic waterfalls. The group had booked a pension, a type of guest house that combines indoor comforts with a glamping-style outdoor experience. The area, though surrounded by nature, wasn't completely isolated. Bus stops and businesses were just a 20-minute drive away. Joining Unai and Sang-yep were their longtime friends, Cho Han-soo, and 5 others, Desale, a friend of Unai, Junho, a co-worker of Han-soo, Yoon-young, Junho's girlfriend, and Hyup, a friend of Desal. On the surface, it appeared to be a fun, casual summer outing, but beneath the surface, something else was brewing, especially between Unai and Sang-yep. Though they were legally married, The couple lived apart. Unai resided in Incheon, a bustling coastal city, while Sang-yep worked in Suwon, the official reason, a difficult commute. But as events unfolded, it became clear that the commute wasn't the real issue. By 3 p.m., the group had settled near the riverbank, inflating large floating tubes and unpacking supplies. Despite the summer heat, the water was surprisingly cold. Most other visitors had already left, leaving the area relatively quiet. Sang-yep, who had openly admitted he couldn't swim, cautiously climbed onto a tube near the shallow edge. The river, however, deepened quickly toward the center. Visibly nervous, Sang-yep protested as Hansu, seemingly amused, began pulling him further out. Unai suddenly shouted, "Flip him," prompting Hansu to laugh and try to overturn the tube. Sang-yep clung tightly, pleading for them to stop. "I can't flip him. He's too heavy," Hansu yelled back, laughing. "Help me." Instead of easing off, Hansu continued pushing the tube farther into the deep water. Some members of the group began chanting the Jaws theme. Sang-yep clearly panicked, begged them to stop, but his fear was met with amusement. Unai and Hansu appeared to enjoy tormenting him, bullying him despite his obvious distress. After several minutes, they finally relented. Sang-yep, shaken, told them he wasn't having any fun. The group simply laughed it off and returned to shore. An hour later, they moved to the parking lot to dry off. Hansu suggested cutting open a watermelon they'd brought, but they'd forgotten a knife. Instead of finding another solution, he proposed a game of rock, paper, scissors to decide who would smash the watermelon open with their head. They played, but it seemed the choice was already made. Unai lost, then turned to her husband and pressured him to do it for her in front of everyone. With nowhere to hide, Sang-yep complied. Hansu held the watermelon steady as Sang-yep slammed his head into it, cracking it open. He wasn't seriously hurt, but the humiliation was palpably another moment that reinforced the unsettling power dynamic in the group. Unai and the others laughed, seemingly entertained by his discomfort. As evening settled in, the group made their way to a nearby cliff overhanging the water. Around 8:20 p.m., Hansu, along with Junho and Hyep, jumped from the cliff into the river below. The water was deep, dark, and cold. Sang-yep hesitated, visibly uneasy, but the group pressured him, taunting and daring. Unai joined in too, donning a life vest and challenging him. "If you don't jump in, I will," implying she was braver. Cornered once again, Sang-yep jumped. Moments later, the others resurfaced, but Sang-yep did not. At 8:24 p.m., Unai dialed Korea's emergency number, 119, reporting that her husband had gone under and hadn't come back up. Rescue workers from the Gapyeong Emergency Department arrived at 8:43 p.m., having navigated a narrow single-lane road into the valley. A second rescue team, coming from 24 kilometers away, arrived at 8:51. At 9:05 p.m., they found Sang-yep's body. He had no pulse, no signs of life, despite 15 minutes of CPR and a transfer to the nearest hospital and later to a larger one. He was officially pronounced dead at 10 p.m. The autopsy confirmed the cause, drowning. Una. I told rescuers that after realizing her husband wasn't resurfacing, she threw another inner tube into the water, hoping he would grab onto it. But the water was too dark. She added that he hated swimming, but had come on the trip only to make her happy. Yet as the investigation unfolded, her story began to crack. Witness statements and physical evidence painted a different picture, one of emotional abuse and bullying. Months in the making. In December 2019, 5 months after his death, Unai filed a claim on her late husband's life insurance policy. The payout, a staggering 800 million won, approximately $600,000. But the insurance company, Shinhan Life, denied the claim. They suspected foul play, the most glaring red flag. The policy had expired on June 30, 2019, just 4 hours after Sang-yep drowned. Furious over the denial, Unai took to the internet, accusing the company of fraud and corruption. She reached out to Unanswered Questions, a well-known investigative program on SBS, known for exposing hidden truths. In her email, titled "Illegal Atrocities by Large Insurance Companies Are Still Happening," she painted herself as the victim. She claimed she and Sang-yep had been happily married for 8 years and that his death was a tragic accident. She said she was now locked in a battle with a ruthless insurance giant trying to cheat her out of what was rightfully hers. Intrigued, the show's producers began to investigate, but just as quickly as she had reached out, Unai vanished. She stopped answering phone calls and emails. Days turned into weeks. The production team tried everything, but Unai remained unreachable. With no further cooperation, the Unanswered Questions team had no choice but to suspend their the time being. The case had long been shelved till a news article caught the production team's attention. It reported the death of Sang-yep, describing it as a tragic accident. He had drowned after jumping into the water. His foot allegedly caught between jagged rocks below the surface. But buried deep in the online comments was a revelation that changed everything. One user claimed Unai, Sang-yep's wife, had collected a significant insurance payout after his death. The same comment hinted at substantial debts hanging over her. Curious, the production team dug deeper and discovered that the Ilon police station had quietly reopened the case. Now treating Sang's death as a possible homicide, Unai wasn't just a grieving widow fighting an insurance company. She was now a murder suspect. The police had been tipped off by Shinon Life Insurance, the same company that had initially denied her claim. Their suspicions of fraud had evolved into something far darker. Determined to uncover the truth, the investigative team reached out to people who knew Sang-yep best. His older sister painted a starkly different picture from the one Unai had presented at the time of his death. Sang-yep was 39 years old, a kind-hearted man who had worked at a research firm for 15 years, earning a stable and respectable salary. He led a modest life. Unai, on the other hand, was 11 years younger and had claimed their relationship began when she interned at his company. But when investigators spoke to Sang's colleagues, none of them remembered Unai ever working there. The very foundation of their relationship had been a lie. Even after years together, Sang's family had never met Unai's parents. Every request to arrange a formal meeting was dodged. As the investigation continued, a deeply troubling financial picture began to emerge. On paper, Sang-yep should have been comfortable. His annual salary of around 64 million won, approximately $48,000, was more than sufficient for a modest lifestyle. Yet, in 2018, he filed for bankruptcy. His bank records told a heartbreaking story. Despite working full-time, Sang was barely surviving. Month after month, his income was drained into the same sinkhole. Unai, she had convinced him she needed money to help her parents pay off debts. But when his family reached out to them, they were stunned. Unai's parents had never received a single cent. Private text messages revealed the toll this financial abuse had taken. Sang could barely afford food. He relied on free lunches at work and often skipped other meals. On weekends, he sometimes went entirely without eating. In one desperate message, he begged a friend for just $5. While Sang suffered, Unai thrived. She traveled abroad, spent lavishly, and showed no signs of financial distress. He wore torn shoes while she flaunted luxury. In texts, he pleaded with her to send money so he could pay the electricity bill. When investigators examined the apartment's CCTV footage, they found footage of Unai and another man entering Sang's home just days after his death, laughing, mocking him, and removing whatever valuables were left. None of these items were ever returned to his family. Even in death, Sang was being looted. Sang was so financially broken that he had even considered selling his kidneys just to survive. In 2019, Unai had taken out 4 life insurance policies on him, totaling 800 million won. The timing of the policies, with his deteriorating financial conditions, suggested something far more sinister. At his funeral, organized by his family with traditional rites, another shocking revelation emerged. Sang had adopted a 9-year-old girl the year before his death, Unai's daughter, from a previous relationship. But Sang had virtually no presence in the child's life. There were no photos, no shared memories, nothing to suggest a real bond. The adoption appeared purely transactional. Even more puzzling was Unai's behavior at the funeral. She came alone. Her daughter and other family members were absent. She gave no explanation. Then, just weeks later, while Sang's family remained deep in mourning, Unai was posting poolside selfies and photos from expensive vacations. Meanwhile, investigators made a chilling discovery. 3 months before Sang's death, Unai had attempted to poison him with pufferfish toxin, a substance so deadly that even trace amounts can kill. Somehow, Sang survived. But it was now clear his drowning was no accident. It was a calculated, premeditated murder. In December 2021, arrest warrants were issued for both Unai and Jo Hansu, the man seen with her in the apartment footage. As the walls closed in, the pair fled into hiding. The case exploded across national headlines. Public wanted posters were issued, and citizens were urged to report sightings. The first break came on April 3, 2022, when a tipster reported seeing a woman resembling Unai at a subway station. Then a former associate of Hansu stepped forward. He revealed that Hansu had worked at an illegal brothel, where he first met Unai. She had convinced Sang to invest in illegal sports betting, a move that sank him further into debt. Finally, on April 16, 2022, after 17 days on the run, Unai and Hansu were arrested. They had been hiding in an office in going, living off cash, using burner phones, and avoiding the outside world. Neither resisted arrest. With Unai in custody, the full scale of her deception came to light. A 339-page investigative report revealed she had drained over 210 million won from Sang's accounts, funneled into the names of Hansu, her father, and 3 of her friends. By June 2018, Sang's debt had ballooned to 128 million won. Experts concluded that he had been psychologically broken. In January 2019, 5 months before his death, Sang texted Hansu a chilling line: "Unai is the cruelest person alive." By the time he died, Sang was a shadow of himself, and he wasn't Unai's only victim. Investigators uncovered a pattern of insurance scams stretching back years. In September 2017, just 6 months after marrying Sang, Unai traveled to Japan with another man. There, she falsely reported her travel bag stolen and collected 1.5 million won in insurance. She repeated the scam in Macau in 2019, this time collecting 2 million won. In April 2019, she took out yet another insurance policy in Sang's name. 2 months later, he was dead. She collected 1.3 million won. In total. There were 850 investigation records and 41 witnesses called to testify. And still, Unai showed no remorse. She never apologized to Sang's grieving family, never expressed regret. Throughout her trial, she remained cold and emotionless. In a final blow, medical examiners confirmed that Sang had foam in his lungs, classic sign of drowning, but also consistent with poisoning. The evidence was irrefutable. This wasn't a tragic accident. It was the methodical destruction of a man for money. His lungs, a telltale sign. They held irrefutable proof that he had struggled to breathe, desperately fighting to keep his head above water before drowning. This wasn't a peaceful slip beneath the surface, as Unai had claimed. Her story, that he had gotten his foot caught between rocks and silently vanished, was a lie. Lai and Hansu had lured Sangyep into the water, fully aware he was a weak swimmer. No one tried to save him. It was cold, calculated murder, and the motive: money. Her plan had always been to dispose of him once he was no longer useful. Born in 1991, Lunhai was an only child raised in a poor household. Both her parents were disabled and relied on government subsidies to survive. Life was hard, but in the early years Unai seemed to live an ordinary life. Then something changed. By middle school, neighbors began noticing her erratic behavior. She frequently ran away from home. In July 2006, at just 15 years old, Unai and her friend engaged in prostitution with a man. Though they were legally victims due to their age, this marked the beginning of a long and disturbing criminal history. Between 2008 and early 2009, she repeatedly committed crimes throughout Incheon metropolitan city. Her method was simple but effective. She would lure men to motels, pretending to agree to conditional encounters. Once inside, she'd wait for them to shower, then she would rob them, taking their money, wallets, and valuables. By the time authorities caught up with her, she had stolen nearly 4 million won, approximately $3,000. On May 16, 2009, at just 18 years old, Unai was finally arrested and sent to the juvenile department. But under Korean law, juvenile records are automatically destroyed after 15 years. No one could say for certain what her sentence had been. But one thing was clear. Unai had been a manipulator, a thief, and a liar, long before she ever met Sang-yep, and now, her past had finally caught up with her by 2010. At just 19, Unai was pregnant. But if anyone expected motherhood to change, they were mistaken. Even while carrying a child, she continued her reckless, dangerous lifestyle. She was a regular at nightclubs, known for instigating fights and getting into violent altercations. Eventually, her aggression caught up with her. She was investigated for assault. Then, on January 15, 2011, she gave birth to a daughter. The child's father, a former boyfriend, never lived to see his baby girl. That same year, he died in a tragic accident at an intersection in Incheon. The circumstances surrounding his death remain murky. Police never uncovered detailed records. Whether it was truly an accident or something more sinister is still an unanswered question. But one fact is undeniable. This would not be the last time a man close to Unai would die under suspicious circumstances. By 2014, Unai had moved on to a new relationship, this time with her common-law fiancé, known only as Lio. They planned to marry. Then came the trip to Pai, Thailand. It was meant to be a romantic getaway. Instead, it became a fatal excursion. While snorkeling, Leo drowned. The autopsy confirmed water in his lungs and detected a small amount of alcohol in his system. The official ruling, accidental drowning, but something didn't sit right. His phone was missing, never recovered, and it wasn't Unai, but Leo's family, who received the insurance payout. This marked the second time a man romantically involved with Unai had died under mysterious circumstances. At the time, authorities found no direct evidence of foul play, but in hindsight, Leo's death looked eerily similar to what would later happen to Sang-yep by now. Unai had perfected the art of deception. The act was meant to bring merit and good karma, but, in a sudden, harrowing twist, she collapsed. Witnesses rushed to help, finding the woman unconscious on the ground. Emergency services were immediately alerted. Paramedics attempted CPR, but by the time they arrived, it was too late. She was already gone. The medical team initially suspected cardiac and pulmonary failure, likely an accident, but her sudden death raised more questions than answers. The woman was identified as Miss Cyan Kong, known to many as Ki, a 32-year-old successful businesswoman from Canterbury Province. But her parents, Mr. Parr and Mrs. Ruja, were unconvinced that their daughter had died of natural causes. Cyan had no known health conditions. Even more troubling, several of her personal belongings were missing, including approximately $1,400 in cash, 2 mobile phones, an iPhone 14 Pro Max, and an Oppo, her purse, and her car. At her family's insistence, police began a deeper investigation. CCTV footage from the scene revealed that Key hadn't gone to the riverside alone. She had been accompanied by her friend, A.M. Sowit, known simply as A.M. The two women had gone there to release fish into the river. At first, the footage shows them walking together, but soon, they split up. Key headed towards the water, while A.M. crossed the road and lingered nearby. Then something strange happened. A.M. is seen wandering back and forth as if searching for something or someone. At one point, she asks a passerby for directions and points toward the river, looking lost, confused, disconnected from the moment. Shortly after, A.M. is seen running back to the car, retrieving something, and descending the stairs toward the riverside where Key was, but then almost immediately she reappears in the footage, climbing back up the stairs, alone, getting into the car, and driving off, leaving her friend behind. The behavior was bizarre at best. K.O.'s family was baffled. The two had planned to release the fish together. So why did Am walk away? Why didn't she help when her friend collapsed? Why didn't she stay at the scene? Further investigation traced K.O.'s car to the home of one of Am's acquaintances. CCTV showed that K.O. had driven to Am's place, and from there, A.M. drove the two of them to the riverside. But even more troubling, many of K.O.'s belongings were still unaccounted for. When initially questioned by police, A.M. denied being at the river that day. But when confronted with the security footage, her story changed. She admitted she had been there after all. Her explanation: she claimed she had to leave suddenly to attend to urgent matters, and since bystanders were already helping Key, she assumed her friend would be okay. However, that didn't explain the missing items. It was later discovered that A.M. had actually mailed some of K.O.'s possessions to one of her own friends on April 19, including her purse, Oppo phone, and wallet. The rest remained missing. Do you believe? Her K.O.'s parents didn't, and neither did a man named Mr. Rapesham. He would play a pivotal role in uncovering the truth about Aim's actions. From the moment he reviewed the footage, he sensed something was terribly wrong. But even he couldn't have predicted the depths of deception about to be revealed. If Am was responsible for Key's death, how did she do it? And why? Poisoning was initially ruled out. In K.O.'s case, the first toxicology report showed no signs of toxins in her system. But her sudden and mysterious death quickly made headlines and captivated the public. Soon after, the phones at police departments and newsrooms rang non-stop. People across Thailand began reporting eerily similar stories. Friends or loved ones who had died under mysterious circumstances, right after spending time with the same woman, M. Many of these victims had one disturbing detail in common: their fingernails were blackened at the time of death. And there weren't just a few cases. There were at least 15 suspected victims between 2020 and 2023 alone. If Am was indeed responsible, how had she managed to kill so many people and remain undetected for years? Am was finally arrested on April 23, 2023. News of her arrest spread like wildfire, and the public began speculating about the extent of her crimes. Then, a new victim came forward, a woman who had reportedly loaned Am 250,000 baht, roughly $7,300. During a meeting at a mall in Kanchanaburi province, Am offered her a pill. Shortly afterward, the woman experienced chest tightness and numbness in her hands. Fortunately, she was rushed to the hospital and survived. But who exactly is M? At the time of her arrest, M was 36 years old. Her ex-husband, Ban Rasarn, was a high-ranking police officer. After marrying, the couple moved into official police housing and had 2 children. As Ban Rasarn advanced in his career, becoming a lieutenant colonel, the family's lifestyle improved, and they moved into a new home. Though Am and Ban Rasarn divorced in 2020, they reportedly remained on good terms, likely for the sake of their children. When exactly Am began killing remains unclear, but among the long list of her suspected victims was her most recent boyfriend, known publicly as Mr. Day. He died just a month before KO's mysterious death on March 12, 2023, at 1:30 p.m., under suspicious circumstances. His death was officially attributed to cardiopulmonary failure. AM was the one who called the police, claiming to be his girlfriend and stating she was pregnant with his child. No foul play was suspected at the time. However, on the very same evening of Mr. Day's death, AM celebrated her birthday with friends. Who in their right mind does that? And just 6 days later, on March 18th, she pawned Mr. Day's gold jewelry. Not only that, but she also took control of his property. Mr. Day's family didn't question this at first, believing that AM was pregnant and had a rightful claim to his estate. One of Day's close friends, let's call him Mr. Kung later, spoke with the media. He'd known Day since childhood and found the entire situation deeply suspicious. According to him, AM had packed up all of Day's belongings and removed any trace of him. He also believed the child she claimed to be carrying did indeed belong to Day. Day had met AM through a dating app in December 2022. She bragged often about being a moneylender, claiming to pawn land and cars, dabble in stock trading, and most tellingly boasted that her ex-husband was a police deputy director who could make problems disappear. On March 11th, a friend of Day's named May encountered AM for the first time. She saw Day and M sitting on a marble bench outside her house. Day seemed distant and serious, very unlike his usual cheerful self. AM, on the other hand, talked non-stop, asking Day if other women were pursuing him. Day simply replied that he didn't know. The next day, March 12th, Ham called May in a panic. She said something was wrong with Day and that he was bleeding. When May arrived, Day was lying down inside, still warm but motionless. Blood stained his mouth. She noticed that his fingernails had turned black. At the time, she wondered if he had been poisoned or put under some kind of spell. Oddly, Day, who was usually known to carry large amounts of cash, had less than 10 baht in his pocket. In the weeks prior, he had reportedly told friends that he had seen AM kill someone before and even called her evil. Suspicious and desperate for answers, his friends searched the room. That's when they found something chilling. A bottle, labeled UN 1680, potassium cyanide. Cyanide is one of the deadliest poisons in existence. Odorless and tasteless, it can be slipped into food or drink unnoticed. Once consumed, symptoms begin almost immediately. Shortness of breath, confusion, unconsciousness, and death can occur in as little as 15 minutes, depending on the dose. Confirming cyanide poisoning is difficult. Specialized testing of blood and tissue is required to detect its presence, often making it hard to connect the dots in sudden, unexplained deaths. In Thailand, cyanide is primarily used in gold and silver extraction, and sometimes in electroplating. Though heavily regulated, it's still accessible through illegal channels, and that's exactly how AM got it. Forensic teams discovered cyanide traces in a vehicle shared by AM and her ex-husband. This led to a search of her ex home, where police found large quantities of unlabeled drugs and empty capsules. He claimed he had no idea what they were. Similar substances were also found at AM's mother's home. All tested positive for cyanide in May 2023. The autopsy report for Koi confirmed what many feared: cyanide poisoning. When questioned again, AM refused to speak, but when pressed, she made an outrageous claim that Koi had willingly ingested a drug laced with cyanide, and she had merely helped her do it. She also said she got the cyanide from her no-deceased boyfriend, Mr. Day. You can't make this up. The absurdity of her lies, the blatant denial, the bold shifting of blame, the sheer coincidence of everyone around her dying from cyanide was staggering. Yet for years, she slipped through the cracks. And the question remains, how many others did she poison before someone finally noticed? There's an abundance of things on this planet, but one I'll never understand is this woman, Miss M. She should have just kept her mouth shut. Maybe then a defense attorney could have done something for her. But maybe it was never about getting off easy. Maybe, deep down, it's about justice for her many victims, of course. We say innocent until proven guilty, and sure, there's always the chance that she was framed, but I highly doubt it. Police examined the victims and found one connected to AM, mostly through financial ties. What's truly shocking, though, is that several of her victims were police officers, people who likely met her through her ex-husband's connections. If even officers weren't safe, then who was? AM's reach extended. Far she even targeted high school friends. It seemed anyone in her orbit could become a target. One of her main tactics involved the rotating savings and credit association, commonly known as a ROSCA. A ROSCA is a traditional savings system where members contribute a fixed amount of money into a communal pot. That pot is then distributed to one member at a time on a rotating basis until everyone's been paid. It relies heavily on trust and doesn't involve interest, making it an attractive alternative to formal banking, especially in Southeast Asia, while it's often a lifeline for people trying to save for emergencies. AM turned this tool of community support into a trap. She used ROSCAs to assess victims' financial stability. If someone seemed like they had enough disposable income, she'd pounce offering investment opportunities, loans, or quick cash solutions. The catch: these victims rarely lived long, enough to see any returns. Take, for example, Natalia. In August 2020, Natalia pawned her Honda Civic for $150,000 at AM's suggestion. That same night, after the two had gone out for drinks, Natalia was found face down in a bathroom. Her face was discolored. A doctor ruled the cause of death as circulatory and respiratory failure, and the family didn't question it, at least, not at first. But then, the family received a call from a company saying that Natalia had pawned her car. Shocked, they scrambled to pay the money to retrieve it. They didn't know that Natalia had handed the cash to M, who had already disappeared. This same pattern repeated over and over, and it gets worse. When some families couldn't afford to reclaim their deceased loved one's car, AM kept the vehicle profiting further from her crimes. In one particularly disturbing twist, she even hired a lawyer to pressure families into paying her more, exploiting their grief and financial desperation. Now, was that lawyer complicit, or just blindly following orders for the sake of a paycheck? That's a question still lingering in the minds of many. AM's preferred method of murder: cyanide. She'd invite victims to temples, religious ceremonies, or meals. Once there, she'd offer them food or drinks laced with poison. During the COVID-19 pandemic, she masked cyanide in capsules, posing as medicine or diet pills. It's terrifying to think something as innocent as coffee from a friend could be your last sip. Police identified more victims, including one as recently as April 1st, 2023. Surveillance footage showed AM sitting next to a police officer named Napa at a temple. Napa had previously lent her money. M lured her there for fortune-telling, and Napa never made it home. Investigators were eventually able to trace the cyanide to a chemical shop in Bangkok that had sold over 1,500 bottles. That's when the horrifying realization hit: it wasn't even hard to obtain. AM also profited from life insurance policies. Often, victims would take out a policy with her as the beneficiary, meant to act as collateral if they defaulted on a loan. When the victims died, the deaths appeared natural unless specific tests for cyanide were ordered. Without those tests, AM walked away with life insurance payouts again and again. All in all, AM is suspected of stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars. Police uncovered 180 bank accounts in her name, holding 78 million baht, or around $2.3 million USD. But it's believed she squandered much of it due to a gambling addiction. No one's calling her a victim, though. That's blood money in the most literal sense. General Surachit of the Royal Thai Police described her as a psychopathic individual with no guilt or conscience. Upon her arrest, she denied everything, while her ex-husband and lawyer were both arrested. The court later dismissed their cases due to lack of direct evidence. Could M face the death penalty? Possibly. Thailand rarely carries out executions. Only one has taken place since 2009, but authorities believe her case may be an exception. If convicted, AM could be labeled the most prolific serial killer in Thai history. If she pleads not guilty, she might avoid execution in favor of life imprisonment. Either way, authorities agree. She should never walk free again. At the time of her arrest, AM was 4 months pregnant. She later miscarried in prison. Social media was brutal in response. Some commenters even celebrated the miscarriage. That's the level of public hatred this woman has inspired, and it's no wonder. Many of her victims were the primary breadwinners for their families. One had even just welcomed a newborn baby. Am's reign of terror dates back to at least 2015. Investigators believe she got a taste for murder and financial gain after an early victim. Sai am offered to help look after Sai's properties while she lived abroad. When Sai returned to Thailand, more than eager to see her, AM picked Sai up from the airport and brought her back to her condo. The very next day, Sai was found dead. After Sai's death, M took control of her property, sold her house, and kept all the money for herself. Research shows that female murderers often kill to gain benefits from close relationships, while male killers are more frequently driven by violent impulses or dark fantasies. But regardless of motive, Am's growing body count puts her in the same league as many of history's most notorious serial killers. Case 5. Donna Ellen Brown. Donna Ellen Brown was born on November 10, 1963, in Hollywood, Florida, to Sarah Jane Brown and Robert Cash Brown. She was the eldest of 3 sisters, followed by Jenny and Michelle. The Brown family was tight-knit and deeply bonded. Donna was especially close to her parents and siblings, always showing a nurturing side, something that hinted at her deep desire to have children of her own one day. The Browns lived a comfortable life. Robert worked as an insurance agent, and Sarah Jane was a partner at Cornish Distributors, a newspaper distribution company in Middletown, New York. When Donna was 17, her parents divorced, and her mother later remarried a man named Ira Dresser. Donna had a magnetic presence, warm, outgoing, and full of life. She could light up a room, and her joy was infectious. By the time she turned 24, she was working as an operating room technician. Back then, blind dates were still popular, and it was through one such date that her life would change. Greg Winger, one of Donna's co-workers, often talked about his brother Mark, a quiet and successful man who had just returned from a year-long military service in Korea as a lieutenant. Greg offered to set them up, and Donna agreed. Mark Allen Winger was born on November 26, 1962, in Elyria, Ohio. His parents, Jared and Sally Winger, were a technical manager and a real estate agent. Like the Browns, the Wingers were Jewish and had 3 children. Mark was the youngest. He was intelligent and driven, earning a physics degree from the Virginia Military Institute and aspiring to become a nuclear engineer. By the time he met Donna, he was already working as a physicist for a laboratory manufacturing firm. He was attractive, well-spoken, and very accomplished, everything Donna had hoped for in a partner. Their chemistry was instant. Donna's vibrant energy was perfectly complemented by Mark's calm and reserved nature. They began dating, and Donna's family loved him. The couple seemed inseparable, always holding hands or sitting close. They were deeply in love. 6 months later, in June 1988, Mark proposed. Donna said yes, and their families were thrilled. Donna's sister Jenny once joked that when you marry one Brown sister, you marry all 3. Because of how close-knit they were, their engagement was even announced in the New York Times, and they tied the knot on March 4, 1989. Shortly after their wedding, Mark received a job offer in Springfield, Illinois. They moved there, and Donna found work assisting a plastic surgeon at Memorial Medical Center. Springfield was a peaceful and family-friendly city, and the Wingers quickly settled into a beautiful neighborhood. They were the picture of the perfect couple, successful, in love, respected in their community. But there was still something missing, a child. They tried for 6 long years to conceive, only to be met with the heartbreaking news that Donna couldn't get pregnant. It was devastating. Donna had always dreamed of being a mother, and the loss was felt deeply by both her and Mark. The emotional strain began to take a toll on their home life, but hope came unexpectedly. One day at work, a doctor mentioned a teenage girl who planned to give her baby up for adoption. He asked the staff if anyone knew a couple looking to adopt. Donna's heart leaped. She and Mark were a perfect fit. On June 1st, 1995, Donna and Mark welcomed a baby girl into their home. They named her Bailey Elizabeth Winger. "How do you feel, Donna?" someone asked. "I'm overwhelmed," she said. "I just want her to know. It just so happens that the day she's coming home to us is the anniversary of our engagement. Isn't that wonderful?" Their special delivery had arrived. Bailey instantly became the center of their world. Donna said the bond was immediate and undeniable. She felt like Bailey had always been hers. Her sister described it best. Becoming a mother was the most joyful and fulfilling moment in Donna's life. "Mommy's feeling very comfortable these days with Bailey," Donna said. "And I think we've sort of bonded a little bit." "Oh, I think we've bonded a lot," her sister replied. Smiling. Friends and family showed overwhelming support, especially Donna's coworker and close friend, Dion Schultz. Dion became like an honorary aunt to Bailey, helping Donna navigate new motherhood and offering constant support. She and her husband John often joined the Wingers for outings and get-togethers. When Bailey was just 3 months old, Donna decided to visit her family in Florida, while Mark was away on a business trip in Tennessee. To make things easier for Donna during her return, her mother arranged for an airport shuttle to drive her and the baby home. It was supposed to be a stress-free ride, just Donna, Bailey, and the driver. But instead of being a relaxing journey, it became one of the most terrifying experiences of Donna's life. Although she and Bailey were the only passengers, the shuttle driver began acting erratically. He spoke about how he communicated with a godlike spirit named Dom and claimed to have visions of killings. He also made flirtatious comments, saying he liked older women. His driving was reckless, and he sped far beyond the limit. Donna was petrified. She had no idea how the ride would end. She just prayed she and her baby would make it home safely. They did. Still shaken, Donna recounted the incident to her friend Deanne and then told Mark over the phone. He was immediately alarmed. He urged Donna to write down every detail of what happened, including everything the driver said and did. In the days following the unsettling shuttle ride, Mark and Donna began receiving strange phone calls at their home. The caller would simply breathe heavily and hang up. Mark was convinced it was the same shuttle driver and filed a complaint with BART Transportation. Identifying the driver as Roger, the company suspended him. 6 days after the bizarre encounter, Mark was working out on the treadmill in their basement when he heard a loud crash upstairs. Fearing Donna had dropped the baby or fallen, he rushed up to the master bedroom and found their daughter Bailey lying on the bed. Then, he heard Donna screaming. Grabbing his gun, he ran into the hallway and found his wife being brutally attacked repeatedly in the head with a hammer by a man. Mark aimed and shot the intruder. In the frantic 911 call that followed, Mark cried out, "My baby's crying. I've got to go. ... I'll call you right back." The dispatcher called him back. "Dispatcher. Hello, Winger. Mark. Yes, this is the police, right?" Dispatcher. "Yes. Officers are on their way. I need to know what's going on." Mark. "My wife is dying on the floor." Dispatcher. "Is she still alive?" Mark. "I think so." Dispatcher. "Where's the gun?" Mark. "It's on the table. Please get here." Dispatcher. Who is the man? Mark, I don't know who he is. Dispatcher, is he still inside the house? Mark, yes, he's laying on the floor. I've got to hold my wife. Dispatcher, are you Mark Winger? Mark, yes, and my wife is Donna. When officers arrived, they found both Donna and the intruder unresponsive. Donna lay face down in the dining room. A few feet away, the attacker lay on his back. Officer Dave Berenger, the first on the scene, knew the victims would be taken away quickly. So he retrieved a Polaroid camera and took photos before both were rushed to the hospital. During questioning, Mark described the events in detail. He said the hammer used in the attack belonged to him. Donna had left it out as a reminder for him to hang a hat rack. He recounted how he was in the basement, heard noises, found Bailey alone in the bedroom, something Donna would never have done, and then heard his wife screaming. That's when he grabbed his gun, saw the attacker beating her, and fired. He said the man fell backward, but began to sit up, so he shot him again. Detective Charlie Cox entered during the interview. Mark asked who the attacker was, but Cox, already in possession of the intruder's wallet, didn't answer at first. After Mark repeated the question several times, he finally asked, "Is his name Roger?" Cox confirmed, "Yes, Roger Harrington." Mark reacted with shock, saying, "Oh, my God, that's the guy who's been harassing us all week." Mark went on to say that Roger had been the shuttle driver who made Donna uncomfortable days earlier, that he had called Roger that very morning to tell him to stop, and that he had filed a police report against him. What Mark didn't know was that Detective Cox already knew Roger well. He owned a local trailer park where Roger and his wife lived. Cox had personally dealt with Harrington during past domestic disputes and knew him to be quick-tempered, which aligned with what they were now seeing. While Mark was being interviewed, he asked Detective Doug Williamson for a Diet Coke. When Williamson went to the refrigerator, he noticed a multi-page note Donna had written. It detailed the uncomfortable encounter she had with the shuttle driver. Confirming Mark's story, outside the house, Harrington's car was parked on the wrong side of the street, facing oncoming traffic. Inside the car, they found a note with Mark's name, address, and the time for 30, along with a knife and a tire iron wrapped in black electrical tape. Inside the Winger home, police also found Harrington's yellow coffee mug and cigarettes on the kitchen table, as well as the bloodied hammer. Detectives reassured Mark that he had done everything he could and confirmed that both Donna and Harrington had died from their injuries. Mark was inconsolable. He called his rabbi for comfort and expressed concern that he might be arrested, but there was no reason to worry. Mark and Donna were seen as the victims of a violent home invasion. Mark was hailed a hero for saving his wife. Donna's death was ruled a homicide at the hands of Harrington. Harrington's death was deemed a justifiable homicide in some. The case was officially closed within 48 hours. After the tragedy, Donna's family rallied around Mark and baby Bailey. Her mother and sister took turns traveling to Springfield to help care for them. But during their visits, they noticed unsettling behavior in Mark. He drank heavily and obsessively watched violent movies with intense shootout scenes. It struck them as odd, given what he'd just gone through, but they didn't judge. As far as they were concerned, Mark had loved Donna deeply. They loved and supported him fully. After 4 months, Donna's family could no longer keep traveling to help, so they suggested that Mark hire a nanny. Her name was Rebecca Simic. At just 23 years old, Rebecca was sweet, kind, and beautiful. Donna's family hadn't expected to like anyone filling that role, given how protective they were of Bailey, but Rebecca quickly won them over. She cared for Bailey with genuine love and became close to the entire family, embracing them wholeheartedly. Rebecca had grown close to Mark and Bailey, feeling welcomed and supported by nearly everyone involved in Donna's former life, with one major exception. Dion, Donna's best friend. Dion remained an active presence and frequently offered help with Bailey. However, her support soon started to feel intrusive. Rebecca felt that Dion was overstepping, almost as if she were trying to take Donna's place. When Rebecca voiced her concerns to Mark, he dismissed them, explaining that Deanne was still grieving the loss of her best friend. Despite this tension, Mark and Rebecca's relationship deepened. He seemed completely smitten with her, so much so that, within a year of her becoming Bailey's nanny, and after many late-night conversations, he announced to Donna's family that Rebecca was pregnant. Both were thrilled, but Rebecca was also surprised. Mark had previously claimed he couldn't have children, so she hadn't prepared for the possibility. The couple began planning a future together. Mark started attending church with Rebecca and even promised to raise their children as Christians, stating he would convert from Judaism. This shocked their rabbi Michael Datz, who questioned how Mark could so casually turn away from a faith he'd practiced all his life. Mark simply said, "Judaism is too difficult and unforgiving." The rabbi asked, "What do you need forgiveness for?" Mark and Rebecca's relationship seemed idyllic. "There's a view from our balcony, and Prince Charming is cooking breakfast," Rebecca gushed. "It's very easy to understand why I'm going to marry this man." The two were married in Hawaii in October 1996. Donna's family, however, was devastated. It had only been 14 months since Donna's murder, and already Mark had seemingly moved on. As Mark and Rebecca welcomed 3 more children and settled into a spacious home in suburban Springfield, they began distancing themselves from Donna's family. This caused deep pain, especially for Sarah Jane, Donna's mother, who often cried during the rare visits with her granddaughter, Bailey. Her grief visibly irritated Mark. At one point, Sarah Jane gave Bailey a necklace that had belonged to Donna. Mark asked her to remove it, saying it made him feel bad. After that, their relationship with Donna's parents deteriorated further. Eventually, Sarah Jane received a letter from Mark stating that Bailey would no longer call her grandma. Devastated, she wrote back pleading with him to reconsider, but Mark refused. Realizing they were being shut out of Bailey's life, Sarah Jane and Ira had no choice but to accept it. Still, they never stopped loving her. Every year on Bailey's birthday, they sent her a card. Bailey would sometimes ask Rebecca who Sarah Jane and Ira were, and Rebecca gently explained that they were Donna's parents' people who loved her and remembered her always. Meanwhile, Mark seemed to have moved on from the tragedy, not just emotionally, but financially as well. Less than 24 hours after Donna's murder, he filed a claim on her life insurance policy and collected $150,000. He also received the maximum $225,000 payout from the state's Crime Victims Compensation Act. But Mark wasn't done. 4 months after Donna's murder, he filed a multi-million-dollar wrongful death lawsuit against BART Transportation in the Harrington estate, arguing that BART had failed in their duty to vet an unstable employee. That lawsuit proved to be a critical turning point. Just 1 month after filing the suit, Mark unexpectedly paid a visit to detectives, something that struck them as odd. Most victims' families don't return once a case is closed, especially when they're hailed as heroes. Mark claimed he wanted his gun back from evidence. The detectives didn't object, but Mark's questions made them uneasy. He asked about the case status, if further interviews were being conducted, and other probing inquiries. Detective Cox grew suspicious. His partner, Detective Doug Williamson, had always doubted the official narrative, but had been overruled by superiors. Now, Cox was starting to agree. Still, their instincts alone weren't enough to reopen the case. They needed evidence. And then, unexpectedly, it came. While the wrongful death lawsuit dragged on, and BART Transportation's attorneys launched their own lengthy investigation, police were handed a breakthrough. Years after Donna's death, someone came forward with shocking information. Deanne Schultz, now going by the name Deanne Anderson. Deanne had endured a turbulent few years since Donna's death. She battled severe depression, guilt, and even underwent electroconvulsive therapy. After a chance encounter with Mark and Rebecca at a hospital in October 1998, Deanne, her doctor's advice, decided she could no longer carry the secret. She visited the police and, in exchange for immunity, confessed everything she knew. Deanne revealed she had been having an affair with Mark starting just a month before Donna's murder and continuing for 6 months afterward. She claimed they were deeply in love, had exchanged wedding rings, and even discussed getting married. Deanne said that when she and Mark talked about leaving their spouses, his response was chilling. It would simply be easier if Donna were dead. Mark told Deanne all she needed to do was find the body while he made sure to be out of town. Deanne responded that she wanted no part in such a plan and told him, "I would cease to be a vital person." Despite her refusal, Mark kept bringing up Donna's death. Eventually, Deanne told him, "I'm going to divorce John. You do what you have to do." Later, she recalled calling Mark after seeing him at the emergency room, hoping he might confess. Instead, when she asked how he could live with himself, Mark said he had found Jesus Christ and had been forgiven. He warned her not to tell anyone what he'd said, saying, "Dead men don't talk," referring to Harrington. He added that ignorance is bliss, and again reminded her that if she revealed any of it, our gooses would be cooked. She admitted to police that she'd lived with guilt for years. Detectives Cox and Williamson were skeptical. When they first interviewed Deanne on the day of the murders, she hadn't mentioned any of this. They decided to verify her claims and found that hotel records confirmed her and Mark's stay. They also checked phone records and discovered the two had spent 845 minutes talking by phone, reinvestigating. They re-interviewed several people, including a nanny the Wingers had briefly hired before Rebecca. The nanny said that Deanne's husband, John, once called the Wingers home looking for her. The nanny stepped outside and saw Deanne's car in the driveway. She went back inside, knocked on Mark and Donna's bedroom door, and Deanne eventually emerged. The nanny told her John was on the phone and wanted to speak with her. They also spoke to a close friend of Donna's, who had always believed Donna and Mark had a solid marriage. However, she did recall that, about 2 months before the murder, Donna had mentioned feeling like Deanne was becoming overly attached, obsessive, even as if she were trying to insert herself into Mark and Donna's life. That same friend also remembered an uncomfortable moment after Donna's death, when Mark commented that he missed having a physical relationship and needed a woman's touch. She felt he was making a pass at her and began to keep her distance, while Deanne was visiting police. Mark submitted a demand for a $1.5 million settlement to Bart over his civil lawsuit. The company was close to negotiating a payout when they received a strange call. Deanne phoned Bart's attorney, John Nolan, but refused to give her name. She said only, "Don't settle with Winger. I just went to the police, the case is being reopened." Then she hung up. Nolan used caller ID to get her number and called her back, asking why she'd warned them. She seemed startled and asked how he got her number. He told her caller ID and threatened to subpoena her. That prompted her to come forward. She gave a 60-page sworn statement detailing her affair with Mark and everything she knew. Mark quickly withdrew his lawsuit, but it was too late. Deanne's statement gave authorities the motive they had been missing, and the case was officially reopened. The first step was to re-examine the original evidence, but detectives discovered it was missing. It had been handed over to Mark Winger's attorneys years earlier for use in his civil case, a major misstep admitted by law enforcement. Investigators went to retrieve the files from the attorney's office. As they were leaving, the attorney casually asked if they wanted the Polaroids. Detective Cox didn't recall any such photos, but agreed. Those 3 Polaroid pictures, snapped by the first officer on the scene before paramedics arrived, turned out to be the most critical evidence in the case. No one had ever thoroughly reviewed them. The images showed that Harrington's body was positioned in the same direction as Donna's. This contradicted Mark's statement that Harrington had been kneeling beside Donna's head and fell backwards when shot. The photos showed the opposite. Blood spatter experts confirmed the discrepancy. The Polaroids proved that events did not unfold the way Mark described. As detectives analyzed further, questions piled up. Why were Roger's coffee cup and cigarettes still sitting on the kitchen table? If he had entered the home to commit a violent murder, why would he bring caffeine and cigarettes to such a crime? More puzzling, in Roger's car were two ideal weapons, a knife and a tire iron with a homemade handle. If he planned to kill Donna, why leave those in the car and hope to find a weapon inside? Also found in Roger's car was a note with Mark's name, address, and a time, 4:30. It clearly appeared to be an appointment. So, was the plan to kill Mark? Why would his name be written down if Roger was targeting Donna? Then there was Donna's position. Her body was found face down, but Mark claimed to have cradled her in his arms. Why, then, was she left face down? Afterward, more inconsistencies emerged. Mark said he first went to the master bedroom when he heard the noise. But why would someone do that instead of heading directly toward the sound? Forensic evidence also failed to match his account from the blood spatter on Mark's shirt to the shell casings that didn't land where he claimed he fired the gun, to the direction and location of Roger's wounds. None of it aligned with his version of events. The 911 call raised additional red flags. When police arrived, Mark said he shot Harrington twice, spaced a few seconds apart. But on the actual 911 recording, Mark initially referenced firing only one shot. Even more suspicious, Mark hung up while his wife lay dying because, he said, the baby was crying. On the call, you can hear Roger moaning before Mark disconnects. But after that, there's silence. By the time paramedics arrived, Roger had 2 bullets in his head. Mark's story shifted with every retelling. At one point, he even added that he hit Roger in the chest with a hammer because he was moaning and groaning. The more police spoke to people, the more they realized many had long harbored suspicions about what really happened that day. Mark Winger's behavior around the time of his wife's murder raised immediate suspicions. According to Donna's father, Cash Brown, Mark never displayed the emotions one would expect from a grieving husband. While walking with Cash after the funeral, Mark recounted the events of the murder without shedding a single tear, even as Cash himself was visibly crying. Friends and family questioned several aspects of Mark's story, including why the front door had been left unlocked that day. Donna was known to always keep her doors locked. One of Donna's sisters and a close friend decided to test part of Mark's version of events themselves. While one person ran on the basement treadmill, the other collapsed to the floor upstairs. The person downstairs couldn't hear anything over the sound of the treadmills, just as Mark had claimed. But this test didn't settle their doubts. Instead, it fueled them. By December 1999. Both Bart Cromer, Donna's best friend, and the Springfield Police Department were deep into their investigations. That month, the Springfield State Journal-Register ran an article based on Bart's civil lawsuit, which highlighted blood spatter analysis that directly contradicted Mark's story. Bart publicly alleged that Mark, not Roger Harrington, had orchestrated the killings and murdered both his wife and Roger. The article didn't surprise police or Bart, who were already immersed in their investigations, but it shook Mark and his new wife, Rebecca. Rebecca couldn't fathom that law enforcement was targeting her husband. She stood firmly by his side, convinced that the evidence would exonerate him. But police weren't seeking to clear Mark, they were building a case against him. As the investigation advanced, a chilling timeline of events began to emerge. Just 1 month before the murders, Donna's friend Deanne Schultz confided in her about troubles in her marriage and a temptation to reunite with an ex-boyfriend in Minnesota. Trying to help, Donna suggested that maybe a male perspective would be useful and asked Mark to speak with Deanne. Mark agreed. He arranged to meet Deanne halfway between her home and his business trip location. That meeting turned into the beginning of an affair. From that night on, the two called each other 2 to 3 times a day and met in hotel rooms, cars, and even in their own homes while their spouses remained unaware. Even as Donna, Mark, Dion, and her husband continued socializing together, Donna believed she had a loving and devoted husband. While Donna was away visiting her parents, Mark was already hatching his plan. She returned home to face the unpleasant shuttle ride with Roger Harrington, a ride that, while uncomfortable for Donna, Roger had felt optimistic about. He was proud of his new job with BART Transportation and excited about the van he drove. But for Mark, the awkward shuttle encounter was a golden opportunity. He pounced on it. Mark immediately urged Donna to write down every detail. Just 2 days after that shuttle ride, he asked a coworker what would happen to their adopted daughter if Donna died before the adoption was finalized. 3 days later, he told Deanne, "I need to get that guy in my house." That same day, Mark called Ray Duffy, owner of BART Transportation, demanding Roger's last name and contact information under the pretense of filing a complaint. Duffy declined, but Roger, eager to fix things out, Duffy to share his number with Winger. On the day of the murders, Mark made 2 critical calls. First, he phoned Deanne at work and asked her, "Will you love me no matter what?" She answered yes. Then, he called Roger. Roger's roommate was present when the call came in and confirmed that. Mark invited Roger over to the house, contrary to Mark's claim that he had warned Roger to stay away. Roger told his roommate and another witness about the meeting with Mark. He left the house at around 3:30 p.m., according to crime scene analysts and blood spatter experts. Once Roger arrived, Mark likely forced him to his knees and shot him in the back of the head. The gunshot alerted Donna, who rushed to the room. Mark then bludgeoned her to death with a hammer. He placed a 911 call, but hung up mid-call, claiming a flimsy excuse. Forensics and witness reports revealed that Roger was still alive and moaning in the background, likely prompting Mark to hang up and shoot him a second time off the record. A neighbor confirmed hearing 2 gunshots spaced about 5 minutes apart. Law enforcement reclassified the case as a staged domestic homicide. Roger Harrington wasn't a killer, he was a victim. Mark Winger had lured Roger to his home under false pretenses, killed him, then murdered his wife, and staged the scene to blame Roger. On August 23, 2001, Mark was arrested at work. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and held on a $10 million bond. He asked a childhood friend to help post bail, but the friend refused. The man, once hailed as a grieving hero, was now being prosecuted as a cold-blooded killer. Roger Harrington's family had never believed the allegations against him. Despite his history of mental illness, his mother firmly believed he wasn't capable of violence. His sister, Barbara Howell, described him as the kindest soul you'd ever meet, someone who would gladly run out in the middle of the night to get you milk if you needed it. She recalled his last visit, when he dropped by to pick up baby clothes for a friend in need. Roger's family acknowledged that his mental illness affected what he said, but not how he acted. They recalled a domestic dispute that police had referenced. Roger had returned home one day to find his wife and her ex-husband tossing his belongings outside. He reacted angrily, and during the confrontation, his wife tried to intervene. Police arrived and diffused the situation. It wasn't violence. It was frustration and heartbreak. Trisha Ray, whose mother rented Roger a trailer, told investigators she had tried to convince them of Roger's gentle nature. "I know what they thought," she said. "Here's this man with a good job and a nice house, and look at us. They thought we were trailer trash, and Roger was crazy." Despite some prior legal troubles and hospitalizations, court records confirmed that Roger's struggles were inward. He had never posed a threat to anyone but himself. As Mark's trial began, police acknowledged major failures in the original investigation. They had returned Mark's gun to him, handed over crime scene photos and the murder weapon, the hammer, to his attorney, and even discarded crucial blood evidence. But the second investigation was meticulous. Prosecutors argued that Mark had deliberately lured Roger to his home, murdered him, and then beat Donna to death to silence her, staging the crime to frame Roger. Rebecca remained hopeful, convinced the jury would see her husband's innocence. They didn't. Single quotes T. After 3 weeks of testimony and 13 hours of deliberation, on May 29, 2002, 6.5 years after the double homicide, a jury found Mark Winger guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. One juror later remarked, "If you're going to kill someone, you don't show up with cigarettes and a soda and just hope the murder weapon is already there." The jury concluded that Roger had no reason to be there unless he'd been invited and no means to carry out the crime, even if he had planned to. The most damning piece of evidence turned out to be among the earliest collected 3 Polaroid photographs. Mark Winger was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. On the 6th anniversary of Roger Harrington's death, his family placed a small classified ad in the local paper. It read, "Although your death has interested many, it is your life we truly miss." Roger's father, Ralph Harrington, passed away in 2010, but not before witnessing his son's name cleared. His killer convicted, and his quiet, gentle son finally honored. After the tragic death of their daughter in 1988, Sarah Jane and Ira Dresser took action to honor her memory. They helped fund a new wing at Joe DiMaggio Children's Hospital in Hollywood, Florida, naming it Donna's Playroom. Additionally, the Dressers established Donna's Fund at the Women in Distress Shelter in Broward County, which continues to assist victims of domestic violence. The fund provides financial support for things like security deposits, babysitting, and furniture, helping survivors build new lives. Meanwhile, Mark Winger was transferred through various prisons, starting at TMS, then to Menard, and eventually to the Western Illinois Correctional Center, where he remains incarcerated. He filed multiple appeals, one of which reached the Illinois Supreme Court. All were denied. Winger, who was slight in frame when he entered prison, eventually became a 215-pound, tattooed inmate. He spent years launching legal battles over exercise conditions, arguing that being confined to his concrete-walled cell was causing anxiety, depression, and panic attacks. He described the difficulty of exercising in a cramped space, bumping into walls while doing jumping jacks, making his bed too sweaty during sit-ups, and finding the floor too dirty for push-ups. That lawsuit was also dismissed. Then, in 2006, 4 years after his murder conviction, 48-year-old Winger was indicted again. This time, it was for attempting to hire a fellow prisoner, Terry Hubble, to murder 2 individuals, Don Anderson and Jeffrey Gilman. Gilman had refused to post Winger's bail, which Winger resented deeply. The initial plan was to kidnap Gilman, threaten his family, and extort ransom money. That plan evolved into a murder plot. Don Anderson, Winger's former lover, and the key witness who had exposed him, was to be kidnapped and forced to read scripted statements on video, falsely confessing that she had lied and that Winger was innocent. After that, the hitman would kill her. Winger laid out the entire scheme in a 19-page handwritten document and gave it to Hubble, who promptly turned it over to authorities and became an informant in exchange for a more comfortable prison transfer. The plan was detailed and chilling. Winger instructed that only Dan's fingerprints should be on the letters and envelopes, and that her saliva must be on the stamps, all to make it appear authentic. Winger later claimed it was merely a fantasy and a setup by Hubble, but his recorded conversations betrayed him. In one tape he said, "Here's the thing, look at all I did in my own handwriting. There's things that only I would be able to put in this. The only one who stands to gain is me. It all points to me. I get busted right along with you. There's no way I would not be implicated." At trial, he read a statement saying in part, "I am exceedingly sorry for my foolishness in sharing my fantasies with Terry Hubble. I regret that my incarceration so affected my judgment that I would write down my fantasies as a diversion, and then be idiotic enough to trust those writings in Hubble's hands. The jury took less than 3 hours, including lunch, to return a verdict. Guilty. Winger was sentenced to an additional 35 years on top of his life sentence without parole. He appealed again and lost. Even behind bars, Winger continued, filing lawsuits against the prison system as recently as 2023, and is expected to continue based on his history following Winger's conviction. His daughter Bailey was raised by his wife, Rebecca. She eventually divorced Winger and legally changed both her and the children's last name back to her maiden name, Simi. Rebecca described the change as symbolic, a way to be seen for who they are, not who Mark was. The home she once shared with Winger went into foreclosure, and after years as a stay-at-home mom, Rebecca filed for bankruptcy. She and her children moved in with her brother while she worked to rebuild her life, starting a new career, restoring her credit, and finding independence. Today, Rebecca speaks openly about what it was like to be married to an incarcerated murderer. She now works with Big Brothers Big Sisters to help children whose parents are in prison, just like hers. No one seems to think about the family when someone is incarcerated, she said. I call them the living victims. It's a humiliating, embarrassing role to play, even though you've done nothing wrong. Looking back on old family videos, Rebecca and her children now see Winger's behavior with clarity, recognizing the manipulative, dangerous person he truly was. While Winger had tried to keep Bailey isolated from Donna's family, in 2019, Rebecca helped reunite them. Bailey now lovingly calls Sarah Jane and Ira her grandma and grandpa, just as Donna would have wanted. We hope this video honored the memory of both Donna Winger and Roger Harrington. Donna's mother once said, "Mark is like a chameleon. It's that exact trait, his ability to blend in and deceive. That makes his case so terrifying." Feline held an unshakable belief that her visions were divine messages, communications from God meant to guide her life. This deep conviction had already played a major role in her first marriage, where she felt divinely inspired to divorce her husband, Kurt. Later, similar spiritual impressions led her to suspect that her second husband, Doug, was being unfaithful. When she confronted Doug, he admitted to having multiple affairs, despite the strict LDS Latter-day Saints teachings against infidelity. This admission, combined with more visions, solidified Feline's belief that divorcing Doug was part of a divine plan. She shared these visions with him and asked for a divorce. Though Doug was reportedly heartbroken, cherishing both their faith and family life, he respected her wishes. The divorce was finalized in June 2000. Doug's life quickly took another turn. He began a relationship with his 19-year-old receptionist, Hillary DeWitt, who was also a Mormon and 16 years younger than him. Interestingly, Hillary had been hired by Feline's brother, Duggar, shortly after the divorce. Doug's company was still very much a family-run business, with 5 of Feline's relatives, including her parents, siblings, and sister-in-law, senior management positions. Doug and Hillary's relationship raised eyebrows due to their age gap and physical differences. Hillary's own cousin once commented, "He's like a little man. He's old. He's bald. You're beautiful." To which Hillary simply replied, "He's sexy and powerful." But early in 2001, Feline began having second thoughts. She and Doug met in Dallas to attend mediation for a civil lawsuit they were both involved in. While there, they discussed the possibility of reconciling. Doug returned to Hillary and told her he needed time to process his feelings. Feline went to a temple to pray and seek divine guidance. She told Doug that it would take nothing less than an angel from God to convince her to remarry him. Yet, the very next morning, Feline called Doug and said that during her prayer in the temple, God had, in fact, instructed her to remarry him. Hillary, who had stayed the night at Doug's place, was devastated. Doug emerged from the bathroom, and Hillary recalled asking, "It's over, isn't it?" Doug replied, "It's over. Doug ended the relationship with Hillary, and he and Feline remarried just months later in Las Vegas, exactly 1 year after their divorce. However, their second attempt at marriage was far from smooth. Feline often turned to journaling as a way to process her emotions and seek divine clarity. Over time, her entries took a darker tone. She began documenting visions of her own death and described feeling spiritually prepared for it. She believed her death was part of God's plan. 2 months into the remarriage, Doug and Feline took a second honeymoon to Mount Timpanogos, known for its breathtaking alpine scenery and hiking trails. During one of their hikes, Feline experienced what she described as a powerful spiritual vision. She claimed to see Jesus in the clouds. Eager to get a closer look, she climbed over a rock wall. She lost her footing and fell approximately 6 feet. Miraculously, Feline survived. She sustained only cuts and deep bruises, no broken bones. A large pine tree was believed to have broken her fall and likely saved her life. Medical staff were baffled by how minor her injuries were, given the height of the fall. Feline confirmed Doug's account, saying her knee buckled just before she tumbled down. Despite being dazed, she was conscious when she landed. She pleaded with Doug not to take her to the emergency room, but he insisted. She was treated and released a little over an hour later, sent home with medication for her pain. The couple stayed with a friend nearby before flying home to Arizona. What no one knew at the time was that Feline had not only written about preparing for her death in her journals, she had also left behind notes with Mormon scripture placed throughout the house and personal items labeled for loved ones, detailing who should receive them after she was gone. Back in Arizona, Doug called on his friend Chad White, a physician assistant, to evaluate Feline at home. Despite her minor injuries, White noted that Feline seemed in good spirits. To manage her pain and sleep, he gave her a pain relief injection, prescribed a muscle relaxant, and gave a very limited prescription for Ambien. White explicitly warned Doug not to fill the Ambien prescription unless the muscle relaxant didn't work, and emphasized the importance of not mixing the medications. He also instructed Doug to call him first if the Ambien was ever needed. But just as Feline had foreseen, her time appeared to be running out. On the morning of September 27, 2001, Doug said he awoke to find Feline unresponsive in the bathtub. He told investigators that she had woken up during the night in pain and was unsure whether she had already taken an Ambien. Later, she chose to take a bath because she had urinated in the bed. Doug claimed he dozed off as she began drawing the bath. After finding her submerged and unresponsive, Doug began CPR and called Chad White, who immediately contacted 911 and rushed over. Upon arrival, White took over CPR, but nearly every chest compression caused only water or vomit to be expelled. Doug was described as kneeling nearby, wailing in distress. Feline was transported to a hospital in Mesa and placed on life support. Blood tests revealed a high concentration of Ambien in her system, enough to render her unconscious. Despite the efforts of doctors, her brain activity ceased, and later that day, Doug authorized her removal from life support. Life support was eventually withdrawn, and Feline was pronounced dead later that afternoon. Doug provided police with Feline's personal journals, which he claimed outlined her plan and state of mind leading up to her death. Based on his version of events, authorities classified Feline's death as an accidental drowning. However, her family strongly disagreed. To them, Doug's behavior immediately raised red flags, starting with what he did when he found Feline unresponsive in the bathtub. Instead of calling 911, Doug phoned his friend Chad White, a physician assistant. While driving to the Grant residence, White placed the 911 call himself. He told the dispatcher, "I just got a distress call from a friend of mine. He said his wife is unconscious and took a bunch of medicine." I couldn't understand everything. He was frantic. I told him to call 911, and he said, I'm afraid to. I don't know why he said that." Further suspicion emerged when Doug's stepdaughter Jenna gave a statement to police that didn't align with Doug's timeline. She recalled that he was already awake and in the kitchen, possibly preparing food for one of his children before Felon was discovered in the tub. While her use of the word probably made the statement less definitive, it still contradicted Doug's claim that he was asleep until moments before finding his wife. Then there was the question of how Phelan drowned. In the first place, Doug had filled and administered all her prescriptions, including Ambien, without first consulting Chad White, despite White's instructions to the contrary. This raised serious concerns, especially given the known risks of combining certain medications. Chad White later told investigators, "When I was performing CPR on Phelan, Doug kept repeating, 'I'm so sorry.' I gave her a sleeping pill, and then she went and got in the bathtub. Then I woke up. He was extremely frantic." Felon's journals offered additional troubling insight. In her writings, she expressed a belief that her early death was inevitable. It was God's will and part of a higher mission. She left behind specific instructions for her family and voiced a desire for Doug to remarry his former girlfriend, Hillary DeWitt, and raise their children together. Not only had Phelan written about this wish, but Doug had already begun preparing Hillary for that role. He had been writing letters and making frequent calls to her, serving as a sort of spiritual mentor. Hillary, whose heart had once been broken when Doug remarried Phelan, was now being drawn back into his orbit. Phelan wrote, "I've held a secret, hoped that I would be able to see you both married. I've had this strong desire that you sit together as husband and wife at my funeral." She even told her children in a letter that Hillary should be invited to sit at the table as your mother while I am away. Phelan believed that Doug and Hillary would one day have a baby girl, one Phelan had longed for herself. But Phelan also wrote about Doug's infidelity. Her acceptance of death seemed to be influenced heavily by Doug's interpretation of what he claimed were divine revelations, recurring dreams where he saw Phelan leaving for the celestial kingdom, the highest level of heaven in Latter-day Saint theology. In a journal entry dated September 5, 2001, she wrote, "I must have faith in Doug's vision. He dreams it every night, now that I will get to go to the celestial kingdom." On the day of her death, a neighbor reported seeing Doug and Hillary embracing in a nearby park. Phelan had not even been buried yet. During that encounter, Doug allegedly told Hillary she would soon be his wife. He gave her several $100s in cash and showed her one of Phelan's letters encouraging them to marry. Phone records would later show that Doug had been in regular contact with Hillary even before Phelan's death. And just 3 weeks after Phelan died, Doug married Hillary. This swift marriage set off alarm bells for Phelan's family. They had known that Doug began dating Hillary shortly after divorcing Phelan the first time, but they were also aware he'd maintained active subscriptions on LDS dating sites during that same period, suggesting his romantic interests weren't limited to just one woman. Then there was the matter of life insurance. Shortly before her death, Phelan and Doug had applied to increase her policy from $300,000 to $860,000. The request was denied, and the policy remained at $300,000 a payout that Doug received as the sole beneficiary. Doug told investigators that boosting the policy was Phelan's idea, and that he had disagreed with it. Despite Phelan's own writings and verbal remarks to families, some made as early as a year before her death, indicating that she didn't expect to live much longer, her loved ones were adamant Phelan would never have willingly ended her life. Not only would it violate her personal beliefs, but according to LDS doctrine, suicide could jeopardize one's entry into the celestial kingdom. While some argued that doctrine was more nuanced, her family firmly believed Doug played a role in Phelan's death. Although her death remained officially classified as an accidental drowning, the ripple effects were profound. Doug's multiple affairs were exposed, and in 2001, he was excommunicated from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for adultery and sexual misconduct. both serious violations of church doctrine. 9 months after Phelan's death, her family succeeded in having the case reopened. They urged law enforcement to re-examine evidence they believed had been overlooked. The police chief, who was also a close friend of Phelan's father, he assigned the case to a lead investigator. But by then, serious investigative missteps had already occurred. Officers had initially assumed the death was accidental. As a result, they had taken only 5 photographs of the scene limited to the bathroom and bedroom, and failed to collect key items for forensic analysis. Critical evidence that could have provided context or corroborated claims was never preserved. Among the items collected as forensic evidence were the bathtub, the bedsheets, and Fenn's clothing, yet nearly all the samples were either mishandled or destroyed, casting serious doubt on their reliability. Authorities even lost Fenn's medication settlements that could have held vital clues about what truly happened to her. To say the case faced setbacks would be a gross understatement. For years, law enforcement struggled to build a solid case against Doug, hindered at every turn by those early missteps and lost evidence. But in July 2005, 4 years after Fenn's death, the investigation finally gained traction. Doug's longtime friend, Jim McCauley, approached Fenn's family with damning allegations. He claimed that Doug had confessed to killing Phelan. Detective Ray immediately reached out to McCauley, but when questioned, Jim denied knowing anything and insisted he didn't want to be involved. With no cooperation, the case once again stalled. Then, on January 27, 2006, Fenn's sister, Shirlene Patterson, contacted Detective Ray once more. She said that Jim had again approached the family, this time asking for a $10,000 loan in exchange for information about Fenn's death. Detective Ray saw an opportunity. He and Shirlene devised a plan, a controlled meeting, in a wired car, with undercover officers nearby. 2 weeks later, Shirlene and her husband met Jim in the parking lot of a Walmart. Jim got into the wired vehicle, accepted a $10,000 check from Shirlene, and began to talk. According to Jim, he had visited Doug the day after Fenn's death. Doug allegedly told him that Phelan wanted to go to heaven, and he had helped her go to sleep. Jim claimed Doug said he'd have compromised the integrity of the trial. However, no formal appeals or overturned convictions have been directly linked to his disbarment. Doug's supporters called his conviction a miscarriage of justice. In 2009, they launched a website titled Doug Grant Truth to spotlight what they alleged were biases, corruption, and misconduct throughout the investigation and trial. Yet public opinion remained sharply divided. Critics questioned why Phelan would remarry Doug if she truly believed her death was imminent, especially if she intended for him to be with Hillary afterward. To them, Doug's emotional displays were nothing more than an act. They believed he knowingly exploited Phelan's state of mind to cash in on her life insurance policy. That same year, Doug's stepdaughter, Jenna Stradling, then 9, a multi-million-dollar wrongful death lawsuit against him. She alleged that Doug was responsible for her mother's death and sought punitive damages to prevent him from profiting through media coverage of the case. Unlike in the criminal trial, key evidence that supported Doug was allowed into the civil proceedings. The judge ultimately ruled in Doug's favor, stating that while the situation may have involved negligence, there was no clear proof of intentional wrongdoing. The judge concluded, "The evidence presented in this case has not convinced the court that it is highly likely the defendant intentionally killed Phelan Grant. As such, punitive damages were denied." Remarkably, Doug won the civil case, despite representing himself with only the support of his wife and children, against Phelan's family, who had a professional legal team. Jim Mackler, who had once accused Doug of misconduct and gave a 2006 interview to the Phoenix New-Times criticizing law enforcement's methods, was never charged with extorting money from Phelan's family. He has since largely stayed out of the public eye after serving his 5-year prison sentence. Doug returned to running his business. He and Hillary remained married throughout his incarceration and after his release. In 2015, Doug and Fallon continued, building their blended family, raising her 2 sons together. Their bond deepened with the birth of their daughter, a child Fallon had long hoped for. They named her Navia, heaven spelled backward, a symbol of the peace they hoped to create. In 2022, Doug's hard work and influence in the fitness world were formally recognized when he was inducted into the International Natural Bodybuilding Association's Hall of Fame. He continued expanding his business to new cities, hosting seminars and workshops focused on holistic health and drug-free living. But even with his forward momentum, a shadow still lingered. Public opinion remained split on Doug's past, with lingering doubts and questions surrounding his guilt or innocence continuing to follow him and his family. Case 7. Mackenzie Shirilla was born on August 2, 2004, to Natalie Shirilla and John Stephen. She was raised in Strongsville, Ohio, where she and her sibling enjoyed a stable and comfortable upbringing. Like many girls her age, Mackenzie was an avid user of social media, frequently posting TikTok videos with her friends, though she appeared sweet and bubbly as a child. Those close to her noticed a change as she entered her teenage years. Some described her as increasingly selfish, vindictive, and entitled, traits that pushed many of her peers away. Despite these behavioral shifts, her parents still saw the well-mannered daughter they believed they had raised. Unaware of the darker path she had begun to walk, Mackenzie began experimenting with drugs and acting out. On one occasion, she vandalized a church while under the influence. Her behavior worsened once she entered Strongsville High School, and it was there that she met Dominic Russo. Dominic was known for his infectious smile and magnetic personality. His siblings described him as the one who could always make them laugh. By age 20, Dominic had already built a resume that included entrepreneurship, music production, athletics, and business. Passionate and ambitious, he had plans to serve his country and join the military. In 2021, Dominic and Mackenzie began dating. At first, they kept their relationship private, but eventually made it public on social media. Mackenzie posted frequent photos of them looking happy, in love, and inseparable. Their families met and grew close. It seemed like a fairy tale romance. But cracks soon began to show. Dominic became frustrated with Mackenzie's increasingly controlling behavior. She expected him to agree with her on everything, and grew agitated when he didn't. Still, their social media painted a picture of perfection, hiding the tension brewing beneath the surface. Eventually, Dominic decided to end the relationship, but Mackenzie refused to accept it. She began showing up at his house uninvited, threatening to harm him and damage his property if he didn't let her in. On one occasion, Dominic recorded her making threats outside his home. He tried to calm her down, always attempting to reason with her. But as he continued to reject her, Mackenzie's desperation only grew. She alternated between pleading with him to come back and making chilling threats if he didn't. The more she revealed this obsessive-aggressive side, the more convinced Dominic became that he had made the right decision. Despite everything, they eventually reconciled. Mackenzie seemed changed, softer, sweeter, and the aggression faded. She invited Dominic to a party hosted by one of their friends. Dominic agreed, and the couple seemed to be on good terms again. They arrived together, laughing and dancing, enjoying themselves in the company of friends. Among the guests was one of Dominic's best friends, Davon Flanagan, a kind and resilient 19-year-old who had spent part of his childhood in foster care before being adopted. He had just graduated from Strongsville High and planned to attend barber school and open his own shop one day. The three of them, Mackenzie, Dominic, and Devon, stayed at the party into the early morning hours. At 5 a.m., Mackenzie woke Dominic, ready to leave. Devon asked if he could get a ride home, and the three climbed into Mackenzie's 2018 Toyota Camry. She drove. Dominic sat in the passenger seat. and Davon was in the back. Initially, Mackenzie drove cautiously. She was the only one wearing a seatbelt, but as she turned onto Progress Drive from Pearl Road, her demeanor changed. She floored the gas pedal and didn't let go. In less than a mile, she accelerated to 100 miles per hour, barreling down a straight, industrial stretch of road. Then, without warning, Mackenzie veered the car directly toward a brick building and slammed into it, head-on, at full speed. It was early Sunday morning in an area surrounded by silent, empty warehouses. No one was around to witness the crash. It wasn't until 45 minutes later that a passerby saw the mangled wreck and called 911. When Strongsville police arrived, the vehicle barely resembled a car. The front end had been obliterated. As the first officer approached, he radioed, "This car's split in two. We've got at least one occupant inside. Send a squad now. This isn't a fresh accident. She's been here for a while." Moments later, he spotted another person in the wreckage. "We've got at least two occupants. No one's moving. Oh my God." They find the third occupant. Oh my God times 3. One of the officers radios in. 3 occupants, number 2. One's conscious. No one's breathing. But then they realize one is. The driver, Mackenzie, is still breathing. They can't get her out. Her head is jammed, and she's severely pinned inside the wreckage. Her fuzzy Prada slippers are still pressed against the accelerator. The officers know extraction won't be possible until fire and rescue arrive. Despite their experience, the crash has clearly shaken them. Oh my God, Jesus Christ. That's the worst I've ever seen, one officer mutters, overwhelmed. Rest in peace, buddy. Mackenzie survives. Dominic and Davon do not. Car parts are everywhere. The vehicle hit the building with such force it looked as if it had exploded. When fire and rescue finally arrive, Mackenzie is carefully pulled from the wreckage and airlifted to the hospital. She undergoes multiple surgeries to save her life. Toxicology tests reveal she was positive for THC, suggesting recent marijuana use. Police also find a bag of psilocybin mushrooms and a digital scale in her possession. At first, police believe Mackenzie simply crashed while under the influence. But as the investigation unfolds, a darker theory begins to take shape. This may not have been an accident at all. When Mackenzie wakes up in the hospital and learns she survived, she breaks down, telling doctors, "It's my fault. I killed my boyfriend." The medical team chalks it up to grief, but investigators take her statement seriously. Following her release from the hospital, Mackenzie returns home to live with her parents, as the Shillis prepare to welcome their daughter back. The Russos and Flanagans are burying their sons. Meanwhile, the prosecutor's office launches a full investigation and things aren't looking good for Mackenzie. Police begin interviewing friends of Mackenzie and Dominic. A clear picture starts to form. Over the course of their rocky, on-again, off-again relationship, Mackenzie had repeatedly threatened Dominic, slashing his tires, breaking into his home, and even threatening to kill him by crashing the car with him inside. Just 2 weeks before the crash, she told him, "Dominic, I will crash this car right now." Dominic's mother later confirms that around that same time, he had called her, pleading to be picked up because Mackenzie was driving recklessly. Too many. Mackenzie's behavior after the crash seemed detached, like she wasn't mourning at all. One photo she posted on Dominic's obituary page was described by the media as twisted, and when she showed up at a Halloween party soon after the fatal crash, dressed as both a corpse and a marijuana leaf, it struck a nerve. Even more disturbing, within weeks, she returned to posting on TikTok. In one clip, she says, "I'm not even cool. I'm just one of those girls who can do a lot of drugs and not die." In another, she boldly claims, "I'm the one you die for." Shortly after getting out of the hospital, still in a wheelchair, Mackenzie is seen attending a concert. She and her mother even engage with a modeling agency on social media. Locals are outraged. They forward the exchange to police. calling her behavior shameless and disrespectful to the deceased boys. Families. The physical evidence begins to stack up. The Toyota was thoroughly examined. No defects, no mechanical failures, nothing to suggest the crash was caused by anything but driver intent. And then there's the black box data, the car's event data recorder. It shows that the moment Mackenzie turned onto Progress Road, she floored the gas pedal. Her foot stayed pressed to the floor the entire length of the road. She never once touched the brake. At the end, just before impact, the steering wheel jerked 142 degrees to the right, then back left, as the car left the road and smashed into the brick building. Her foot was still on the accelerator when they found her. Then comes the surveillance footage. Multiple businesses in the area had cameras that captured Mackenzie's final drive that morning. 2 recordings, in particular, gave authorities a crystal clear picture of her behavior before the crash. The first video showed Mackenzie calmly navigating a corner, slowing down appropriately, using her turn signal, driving responsibly. It didn't align with the behavior of someone high or out of control. The second video, however, shows the instant she turns onto Progress Road, accelerating rapidly, speeding up to nearly 100 miles per hour before veering sharply into the building. The contrast between those 2 videos tells investigators everything. Her calm, calculated driving moments before turning onto the road revealed one thing clearly: she was in complete control of the vehicle right up until she chose to crash it. Investigators turned to Google Maps to reconstruct the final seconds. The route highlights just how devastating her 100 miles per hour plunge was. She drove straight down Progress Road, barely swerving onto the grass before careening through rocks and signs, slamming into the building at full speed. The trajectory, the aim, the speed, all of it appeared intentional. This wasn't a miscalculation. It was a deliberate act. Then, authorities find even more troubling evidence. Cell phone and GPS data reveal that Mackenzie had spent time on Progress Road just days before the crash. The area is remote, industrial. She had no reason to be there. Investigators believe she had been scouting the location, plotting, planning, and yet, despite the mounting evidence, Mackenzie expressed shock that she might face serious consequences. After the crash, she asked investigators, "Can't you just take away my license for like 10 years or something?" But what she had done would lead to far more serious repercussions than a suspended license. Despite Mackenzie's own account of the events, authorities were confident that what happened on July 31, 2022, was no accident. Her prior scouting of the area, the threatening messages she had sent during her volatile relationship with Dominic, the speed and trajectory of her car during the deadly drive, and the fact that her foot remained on the gas pedal, none of it pointed to a tragic mistake. Investigators believed Mackenzie Sharilla had intentionally and callously taken the lives of both Dominic Russo and Davon Flanagan. On November 4, 2022, Mackenzie was arrested and charged with over a dozen offenses. These included 4 counts of murder, 4 counts of felonious assault, 2 counts of aggravated vehicular homicide, 1 count of drug possession, and 1 count of possessing criminal tools. Since she was 17 at the time, she was initially held at a juvenile detention facility. During the pretrial phase, prosecutors offered her a plea deal. She refused it. Her legal team made it clear they were prepared to take the case to trial. But instead of a jury, Mackenzie waived at right and opted for a bench trial, placing her fate in the hands of a single judge. Prosecutors laid out a chilling narrative of escalating threats and controlling behavior. They detailed how Mackenzie lashed out when Dominic didn't do what she wanted, like the time she banged on his door, threatened to break in, and counted down the seconds before she'd make a problem. They presented repeated threats she'd made to crash the car with Dominic in it, arguing she fully understood the potential for deadly harm. In the aftermath of the crash, they noted Mackenzie didn't show remorse or grief. Instead, she was attending concerts, posting on TikTok, and pursuing modeling gigs, living what appeared to be a carefree life. Crash reconstruction experts testified that the car did not malfunction and that the crash was neither accidental nor spontaneous. Surveillance video was perhaps the most damning piece of evidence. It captured the final moments of that fateful ride and showed what prosecutors argued was a deliberate, calculated act. Dominic and Davon, they said, were not victims of chance. Dominic was the target. Davon, his friend, was merely collateral damage. Mackenzie's defense, however, argued that it was all a tragic accident. She had no memory of the crash, they said, and it was unclear who actually turned the wheel that caused the fatal 142-degree turn just 1 second before impact. The defense attorney raised questions. What if she swerved to avoid an obstacle? What if a passenger grabbed the wheel? What if she was trying to regain control of the vehicle? While the defense admitted her driving was reckless, they insisted there was no clear proof of intent. But the surveillance footage told a different story. It was, in fact, that footage that led prosecutors to try Mackenzie as an adult. Ultimately, the judge found her guilty on all 12 counts. During the sentencing hearing, prosecutors emphasized Mackenzie's lack of remorse, pointing again to her social media activity in the months following the crash. The court also allowed impact statements from the victims' families. Davon Flanagan's mother, Jamie Flanagan, was the first to speak. "Your Honor, my name is Jamie Flanagan. I am the mother of Davon Flanagan. What we lost on July 31st, 2022, was not just a passenger. My son was not cargo. He was precious. He was an amazing soul with a heart of gold. He gave to the world what he wanted most in his own life: love. The kind of love that would rescue a friend in the middle of the night without question. The kind of love that protected and uplifted. Davon made friends easily with his infectious smile. He was a gifted athlete who dreamed of going to barber school and opening his own shop. He didn't have a clique. He was a friend to everyone, especially to those whom society often overlooks: the less fortunate, the developmentally challenged, the hurting. Davon made people feel seen. He and his sisters were adopted together from foster care. We were chosen to be their forever family. I am devastated. The world lost someone truly special." Next, Dominic's mother, Christine Russo, stood before the court. I'm Dominic's mother. No one wanted this to be a murder case. We didn't want to believe Mackenzie Shirilla intended to kill. But this was not an accident. The evidence and the science make that clear. I want to thank the Strongsville Police Department and the state of Ohio for uncovering the truth of what really happened in that car. What we don't know is why. I lost 3 children that day: my son, his best friend, and the future I imagined for all of them. Every day, I think about Dom and Davon, and hearing Mackenzie's family cry after the verdict was hard. But that was not remorse. Mackenzie made a choice. My son and Davon did single quotes, TI after the crash. I called Mackenzie's mother. I was hysterical. I told her my son was dead, and that I was checking in on hers. And her first response to me was, "Please, don't believe what people are saying on Facebook. My son is dead," and she was worried about Facebook. This tragedy has been reduced to online gossip, to speculation. But there's nothing speculative about our pain. Mackenzie is still alive. She has a future. My son and Davon were robbed of theirs. She showed them no mercy. Only God can show her mercy now. Finally, Mackenzie's mother, Natalie Shirilla, addressed the courtroom. "My name is Natalie Shirilla. I just want to say, to the families broken, I'm devastated. My heart hurts for everyone involved. Davon was her new friend too. This tragedy has shattered us all. Dom was the love of her life. He was part of our family. I'm just so sorry this happened. We're all heartbroken. Your Honor, this was a terrible, tragic nightmare. It was an accident, one Mackenzie has no memory of, and one she will never emotionally or physically recover from. She almost died too. We're asking that you consider not imposing consecutive sentences. Dom was family. We all loved each other. That morning, I received a call about a car accident. I didn't even know who was involved. No names had been confirmed yet. I was already in tears, fearing the worst. We loved Dom so much. I kept calling his phone, over and over, hoping he'd pick up, but he never did. Then I tried calling his mother. No answer. I still didn't know if Mackenzie was alive, or what had happened. Eventually, his mother called me back. I answered, in a panic, telling her I didn't know who had been in the car, asking what happened. She said, "What do you mean? My son is dead." I was in shock. I apologized. She said something about now having to wait for my daughter to get out of the hospital, but I couldn't hear the rest. I just knew in that moment he was gone. I hung up. I didn't know anything about social media, or what was being said online at that time. Later, I saw someone had commented on a Vitality post, calling Mackenzie a murderer. That wasn't right. She didn't even have her phone. Police still had it, so I went on and commented myself. I wrote that she wasn't a murderer, that she was more heartbroken than most people commenting could imagine. I commented on her behalf, not because of any modeling opportunity or anything else people were speculating about. I didn't even care about the phone. I just wanted people to stop calling her a murderer. People were making threats, saying they'd hurt her once. She was out of the hospital. I didn't want her waking up after surgery, after surviving multiple surgeries only, to see herself being called a murderer everywhere she looked after the crash. For 3 straight months, she only wore Dom's clothes, only ate his favorite snacks, only listened to music he wrote. She cried nonstop. When Halloween came around, her friends asked if she wanted to go out. She didn't even want to. She could barely walk. I told her, "Baby, please go. You've been in bed crying for 3 months. Just have a moment of fun." My husband drove her. I picked her up. She just needed one night of normalcy. And that concert she went to, she went with Dom's cousin, Abby. It was something Dom, Mackenzie, and Abby had planned together. We even spent time with his family after the accident. So if you're looking at those moments as if they're wrong, I ask you to look again. They're not what they seem. She's a good person. If you had just 5 minutes with her, you'd know what kind of soul she has. You'd know what she isn't capable of. I'm so sorry. I love you. That's all I wanted to say. Then, Mackenzie chose to speak. Mackenzie, to the families of Dom and Davon, I am deeply sorry. I hope one day you can understand that I would never intentionally let this happen. I wish I could remember what happened. I'm heartbroken. I love Dom and Nadia. We were all friends. Dom was my soulmate. I wish I could take your pain away. I'm just so sorry. To my family, thank you for your love and support. Thank you for fighting for me. I love you all so much. With her conviction, Mackenzie Shirilla faced 2 mandatory life sentences, 1 for each count of murder. The key question before the judge was whether these sentences would be served concurrently at the same time, or consecutively, one after the other, while the families of the victims hoped for the harshest penalty. The judge weighed the demands of justice against the nuances of the case. In the end, Mackenzie was sentenced to 2 concurrent terms of 15 years to life, meaning she will be eligible for parole in 15 years. Online, her supporters argue that she was unfairly portrayed. Some claim she was coerced into a bench trial, and that her behavior after the crash, posting on TikTok, going out, was poor judgment, but not proof of guilt. Others suggest she may have accidentally hit the gas instead of the brake, or that there was a mechanical failure altogether. They insist that there was no hard evidence proving she intentionally crashed into that building at 100 miles per hour, and that the prosecution relied on character attacks. However, most people side with the prosecution, who said the intent was crystal clear in the surveillance footage. There was no attempt to slow down, No brake applied, just full throttle into a wall. It was, they said, deliberate, and it cost 2 young men their lives. While some members of Dominic and Dev's families expressed relief at the guilty verdict, they were disappointed by the concurrent sentence. They believed Mackenzie should have to serve time for each life lost. Dominic's father, Frank Russo, however, took a more compassionate view. He acknowledged the devastation his family felt, but added, "It's horrible for everybody. Yeah, I lost my son. It's hardest on our family. But I don't want the rest of her life ruined, too. It isn't going to bring him back. It won't make me feel better." As of now, Mackenzie Shirilla is incarcerated at the Ohio Reformatory for Women. She continues to receive letters from supporters who believe in her innocence. She will be eligible for parole on October 21, 2037.